Hi, Simon. How are you?
Hey, Mace, how you doing?
I'm doing well. I just need to post this in all of my group DMs and repost the space and all that stuff, and then we can get started here in a minute. So, for those of you that pulled up, please repost the space.
Awesome.
And then thank you so much for coming and for doing this. I'm super stoked. I have lots of questions because when it comes to something like this, unless somebody really knows the ins and outs, and I'm pretty sure if you wrote a book about it, you do. So it's going to be excellent. But guys, repost the space and we'll get started in 1 minute. Guys, listen, please repost the space, write a little comment, quote, tweet it, and I'll tell you why. We have a narrowing window, okay, between, our current monetary system and then this future monetary system that is already the Bank of International Settlements dropped their blueprint on what this system is going to look like. And, so it is very important to better understand both of the systems, meaning like the alternatives as well as what this centralized one looks like, just so that you can be better equipped to make decisions. And just as, just so you guys all know, this is not financial advice. Do not make sure you're researching everything and you're balancing out because each person's situation is unique. So there's no like one style fits all. And so it's important for you to know that this isn't telling you what to do and what not to do, but just more of an informational, session with an expert. So, and hi, Divergent Squirrel. How are you, hon?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Thank you so much for, helping us with the co-hosting. And if you can maybe kind of like keep an eye on the comments and see if there's any questions for Simon, that'd be great. Let us know.
Thanks for having
And
me.
guys, we're going to get started shortly. Yeah, me too. And once people start sharing, see, for some reason, maybe it's because I've been heavy on this Middle East topic. My spaces, sometimes, I mean, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but they don't show up on the top where most people see them. And they'll have to go over to the spaces section and navigate to that.
Oh,
But
that
sometimes
sucks.
they
Why is
do.
that?
I was just, anytime that, you're like reposting or commenting on anyone who's been deboosted for whatever reason. And a lot of the people I think on the pro-Palestinian side have been deboosted for the content that they've posted. And I mean, it'll kind of weigh on and I'll end up carrying that deboosting. So I go through every couple of days and I'll like delete all my replies just so I can lift that, you know what I mean? And I do that every couple of days. So, but I do notice that when I do it, everything soars. And then after a couple of days, it starts to kind of weigh heavy again. So, yeah, just so you know as well.
Yeah, so that's how we before we get started. But that's how we met. I'm on the pro-Palestine side. It's kind of just been wow. It's just been the most horrific thing I've ever experienced in my life, and I've got no, I'm watching it on the side, and that's where I first met Mace because we were attending several spaces together. So yeah, it's been just an absolutely wild time. Actually, what, Mace? Why don't you tell me a bit about like typically who your audience is? Are they? I take it they're not technical, not geeky in finance. What's like the typical person, or is there no typical person that listens to your space?
You know what's funny? I will tell you, uniquely, I would say, I have a very diverse audience base, and sometimes they can all coexist in the same space. Sometimes they cannot. For example, I see my Bitcoiners in here. My Bitcoiners can never coexist with my, what is it? Oh my God, XRP people. And like the thing is that I have, a lot of political, more on the right, MAGA or just even Republican, and also people who are, very interested in what the global reset looks like, the global affairs, geopolitical, arena. So it's very diverse. I mean, even the rabbit holers, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
So,
Bitcoin is a religion. You know that, right?
oh yeah, yeah, I do. I trust me. I
Like
found
we
out the
can't.
hard way, Simon.
Yeah, we're definitely anti XRP mites.
I found out the hard way. I was attempting to just have kind of an educational session because a lot of people are always, putting their XRP in there even as a part of their bio. And see, what I've come to understand is that, fundamentally that system is going to be what's used to carry this prison, into its fruition, from what I understand. And this is again with lack of the technical points about how that works, but so they're just completely, it's oil and water. They cannot coexist in a space without cussing each other out. There's no alchemy that maize can provide to solve for that problem. So
Yeah, well, I'm a bit of a weird one because I'm a Bitcoiner, but I'm a shareholder in over 100 different companies in the industry because I created a platform that was investing, and one of those startups was Ripple Labs, the company. So I'm actually a shareholder in Ripple Labs, the company. I don't hold any of the tokens, but yeah, I've been through the whole journey, so I know like the whole. It was actually started by a guy that he created the most controversial exchange in our industry. So the token was created by a guy called Jeb McCaleb, and Jeb McCaleb created an exchange that some of you may have heard of called Mt. Gox, and he sold it to a guy called Mark Capellas, and Mark Capellas was the guy that went to prison because this was the largest hack in Bitcoin. It was about 2014. And he sold him the exchange, and it was missing 80,000 Bitcoin. And never actually told him that it was missing 80,000 Bitcoin. So Bitcoin ripped, and he ended up with this 80,000 Bitcoin missing that just became this bigger and bigger hole. And it just became this unworkable. And yeah, everyone, it was a really tragic time in Bitcoin's history because about 70% of all the Bitcoins in existence, or that were trading rather, were on this exchange called Mt. Gox, and everyone lost 90% of their money, and it was really a hard time. This was right after Bitcoin started getting its first traction, when people were gambling using Bitcoin, and they were also obviously got a lot of traction on the Silk Road, which was another interesting experiment, where essentially it took the ability to buy drugs without having to go meet gangsters in streets and buy bad product of whatever they're willing to give you and risk on crime, and it took it off the street, and it started having a significant impact in a reviewed way of purchasing drugs online.
what is
And they
this, the
wanted
black
they wanted to
market,
make it.
or
Sorry.
what's it called? Where were people purchasing? I've never even heard of this.
Oh, right, you must have heard of Silk Road.
I've never heard of it.
Okay, we're gonna have fun tonight. We're gonna do a lot of. So I'm a bit of a historian because I spoke at the very first Bitcoin conference in the world, so I know all the crazy stories that no one knows. So when people talk about Ripple, it's like the currency for they want it to be the currency for the back end of central bank digital currencies. It was actually created by this guy that scammed a lot of the industry out of when selling the most controversial exchange. It ended up just being a really problematic part of our industry in the really early days. I got a lot of stories like that, but we
I
can
can't
jump in.
believe I never heard of that. I mean, I usually would know about stuff like that, especially, hosting spaces and interfacing with various topics that definitely cross over a lot of ground. But yeah, I've never heard. The only Silk Road I know about is the one, China. But
It's the
that's
Silk Road was a dark web marketplace, and yeah, it became. I mean, there's actually a film you should watch. The film Silk Road, and it was this guy called the Dread Pirate Roberts. He's now got life. He's in prison for life, for really bringing peace to the drug trade, and it had a significant impact in terms of the quality of the products, peer reviews, the ability to purchase them at your home, and it was it had billions and billions of dollars of transactions, and the government seized all those Bitcoin. They're actually still selling some of them now. They just put in an order. I think they seized about 50,000 recently, and they sold about 200,000 at $600 back in the day. Now we're at about $45,000, $42,000 a Bitcoin.
So are people buying these in masses and selling them as like they were made in the pharmacy or something? Is that like how they were?
Now, Bitcoin was the currency,
Right.
and Silk
But the
Road was
drugs,
a
like how did they,
yeah.
so that's crazy. That's very
So you could
interesting.
literally you'd make them, people would homegrown them, and then there was a whole like training on how to send it without like the sniffer dogs and stuff finding it, and it just became this multi-billion-dollar startup. And around about 2013, like it started to get like make the news in the US, and they had to catch Ross Ulbricht was his name. And if you look at the Free Ross movement, there's a lot of people that believe he doesn't need to be life in prison for creating technology that allowed people to peacefully and safely buy drugs without having to meet gangs on the street.
Wow, that's crazy. So Simon, tell me about you. What did you do pre Bitcoin? Like and before your success there, but I'm just curious like what got you interested in CBDCs and what I guess inspired you to write a book about them?
Yeah, so I was so I did economics. I'm a finance geek. I've been at this for about 20 years now, and when I got my first job in banking, I was a stockbroker. Then I worked in market making, and then I worked in corporate finance, taking companies public. And after about 3 years, that's all I could last in corporate. Um, I just got deeply, deeply curious about uh, money, not from a making money perspective, but from a how is money actually made, as in how is it printed, and how is it actually created, and what does it mean when it's in a bank account. And I just got so geeky into the subject. I actually read like Bank Charter Acts of 1844 and all these other things. And it took me down this route of discovering some of the more conspiratorial histories of banking. And as soon as I went down that rabbit hole of discovering how banking was created, how central banks were created, I just had to leave finance immediately. So I just quit my job, and just started giving presentations and joined this community called the Monetary Reform Community. This is pre-Bitcoin. And the Monetary Reform Community was a bunch of pensioners. And I came in and I was like, this is around like the Obama time. And I was sharing like, you can share all these messages on social media and all this stuff. And prior to this, it was just like a bunch of old people that would meet in this place in England called Bromsgrove, a place in the Midlands that no one's ever been to. And then I came over. I spoke at it was Dennis Kucinich was actually implementing some monetary reform laws, and so I flew over to Chicago and then just started giving all these presentations. And it was such a small niche community, and just really geeky. And so my wife, she got a little bit pissed off that it just wasn't really going anywhere. We knew that the banking system was a scam, and we were trying to make a difference, and we were trying to share with people how fractional reserve banking is a scam. Essentially, it's a Ponzi scheme, and it blows everything up every 100 years. Um, and so my wife just said, why don't we just, rather than tell people how the system works, why don't we just create our own bank and just do it the way we think we should do it? And so we had a crazy idea, and the idea was to create a non-fractional reserve bank. For those of you not too familiar, fractional reserve bank is how money, 97% of all money in existence is digital, and it's created by somebody else's debt. And when you open a bank, you get a license to create digital currency. And so people think digital currency is a new thing, but it was actually invented by the private banking sector because over time, governments outsource the ability to create money to the private banking sector. And when you get a banking license, if you approve a mortgage, that's actually creating new digital dollars or digital pounds or digital euros into the system. But you also create a liability and some interest that needs to be repaid, and the money to repay that interest doesn't exist. And so you create these Ponzi schemes where you have to keep creating more debt to pay off the previous debt. And essentially, that's how digital currencies work in a fractional reserve banking system. So we wanted to create one, and we managed to raise some money, um, and I was writing my book at the time and sharing, how fractional reserve banking works and all this stuff. And we actually went to the Bank of England and said, "Look, here's our idea. We don't want to. There's three problems with banking. When people deposit their money at a bank, the bank becomes the legal owner. We want to create a bank where they own their own money and we don't own it." We're like, okay, well that doesn't work. And then we were like, yeah, and when they have their own money, we'd like them to be able to just spend it without us spending it for them. So when you put a money at the bank spends your money for you. They create it, and they own it. So it's legally theirs once you deposit it at the bank. And then we said the most strange thing is, which we said, we don't want to create any money. We just want to create a safety deposit box, as it were, for people's digital cash. And they said, well, that's definitely not possible. So they came back to us and said, right, well, you've got to go out there and raise 60 million and you've got to deposit it at the Bank of England. And then once you've done that, you need to go find another bank like Barclays and you need to build your technology on top of their system. And then they can create the money for you and you just build something that sits on top of theirs. And so we just couldn't do it. And we trying to get the license, we just spent like all of our money. And I had a really good job at banking. My wife had a good job at banking, and we just spent everything we had, went completely broke. And I decided to write this book on the subject and all the technology. And then suddenly I got a message on Facebook um, from this guy called Johnny Bitcoin, and Johnny Bitcoin, he sent me this message, and this was like right in the beginning of Bitcoin. He said, "Hey Simon, stop messing around with that. There's this thing called Bitcoin, and what I've done is I've sold my house and I've moved into a squat in London with these developers, and we're going to change the world." And these were some of the early coders in Bitcoin, and so went to go see it, and he said, "Yeah, we're going to do a conference." And I was like, "Yeah, but I ain't got any money. I can't afford to come." And they said, "We're going to do a conference in Czech Republic, and we're going to get about 50 people there." And so we ended up like scraping our last bit of credit card debt together, and we went and spoke at the first Bitcoin conference and shared my vision. It's still on YouTube, on my YouTube channel. um, and it was just, they were creating this technology and it literally did what I wrote about in my book. But I didn't know how to create technology. I'm not a technology guy, and I don't claim to have invented anything that could work like that. But the concept of it was a system where you can own your money. Wow. So you don't need a bank, you can own it. You can spend it peer to peer, so you can spend it as you choose with nobody in the middle. And it doesn't create money every time you issue a loan, and it's not debt back, it's actually hard money. Wow, it's digital gold. And so I just got obsessed with the industry, and we decided to pivot the bank to building a system where Bitcoin companies that wanted to build the future of finance could raise finance. And at the time, no one could rate, no VC would invest in this. It was just completely quirky. So none of these companies that today, like Coinbase and Kraken and Bitstamp and Bitfinex and Ripple Labs, there's another one. So we raised finance for them, and I put some of my Bitcoin into them. We bought our first Bitcoin at $3. And every single month we just said we're going to own a little bit more Bitcoin every month than the previous month, and we kept reinvesting it. And then this industry just blew up, and Bitcoin just became this thing over time. And yeah, just been involved in the trials and tribulations. But the book actually talked about how eventually banks will blow up, and you have to transition to government communist style created money, and it's the only sustainable way of actually doing it in a debt-based system. And it wasn't called a central bank digital currency. But it was a central bank digital currency. And so that was my book, Bank to the Future, Protect Your Future Before Governments Go Bust. And that was
Oh
the
my,
first published book in the world to include Bitcoin.
That is like prophetic because so just so I think this will be a good educational point around the current money system that we have in place. Like, you know, most people are not aware, and this is I like you know, I include this as a part of most of my spaces that I did previously about CBDCs and about Bitcoin and about other alternatives. But when we look at how, you know, money over time, what it represented, it was a means of exchange, right? Like, and people would essentially use it for the services that it rendered, which is allowing people to purchase stuff, and so it'd have to be divisible, and it would need to be durable. It would need to be recognized by everybody. It would have to be portable, and you know, obviously scarce. And so those were the services that it essentially would render. And so what happened with gold over time is that gold became very hard to take with you. I mean, you'd have to literally pay for like a, you know, for it to be stored, or, and then that's what created the need for banks. And they would warehouse it and they'd give you this note, and that note represented kind of like you know, a call. Like you could go and you could exchange that and you could get the gold for it. And then eventually over time, you know, the bankers were like, so if we were to, well, actually, let's just kind of skip over to 1971, where, you know, people were trying to get the gold that the United States was holding, and they eventually, and you know, stopped doing it. They said that they were going to temporarily put a stop on people being able to claim their gold. And then, of course, temporary, you know, turned into permanent, and it was no longer backed by gold. So everything that is printed now doesn't really represent anything of value other than the perceived value that we have over time. And so a lot of people don't know that. And what's happening, as Simon mentioned, you know, whenever you think about what it takes to actually get gold and to mine it, it's kept the value of money pretty stable. Like it's not something that will skyrocket. But when creating money is just now typing a line item into, you know, the digital screen, you can see where that's gotten us. And so they've allowed us to be able to have all these reasons to add money into the in circulation. And so what that does is creates like a very it's misused backdoor into exploiting our value, right? So like basically it's extracting value out of your money. You might have $100,000 and that number might remain the same, but what it can purchase is a lot less over time. And so with that being said, you know, we've all heard about well, most of us have heard about where they're trying to move everything that's in the Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve, by the way, guys, is not government. I mean, it's just, I think that that was intentional because the first couple of central banks that they tried to create did not work. They'd failed. And over time, there was a battle between trying to keep central banks out, but they eventually, through, and I've had all wars are banking wars space. You guys should totally check it out. Check out the replay. But and so they created the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve is basically a central bank that works with each of the countries, and we have the Treasury. And so, with that being said, they're trying to move all of this into a tokenized. So that's the part where it's different, right, Simon? So before, digital currencies did exist, but what they're moving this into is more of a tokenized infrastructure, which will allow them to be able to put parameters on the usage of your money. So, and so I don't know if you wanted to kind of get into that
Yeah.
part of it. Yeah.
So the difference with a central bank digital currency is who creates it and how is it created. So at the moment, the private banking sector create most money. And the central bank tries to influence how much money a private bank creates. And so by using interest rates, essentially, if a country, you know, wants to create more money, then what it historically did before QE aside, is it used to put its interest rates down, And then more and more people would say, hey, I can now afford a mortgage, or I can take on some debt. And so they would go to the bank, and then the bank would issue them a loan. And every time they issue a loan, they created a new digital entry on that computer. That increases the money supply when they issue that loan. And so the digital currency is purely digital. There's nothing behind it once it went to fiat currency. And so, but you have to repay it plus some interest. And so the interest is the bit that doesn't actually exist. And so you end up with a system where every fiat currency, if you want to have more money, you have to have more debt. If you want to have less debt, then you have to have less money. And that's the rules of the game. And so if you think about what they're doing with business cycles and interest rates in its simplest form, is they're saying to you, we need to stimulate the economy. And so to stimulate the economy, we're going to lower interest rates so that you can now take on more mortgages and take on more debt and refinance your debt and take on more debt. And then when you do that, you create new money. And that new money then has this side effect, which is called inflation, which is that the price of goods go up as you start producing more and more money. And so you then get into a cycle where the value of your savings keeps going down and down and down because you're diluting your existing money. And then you try to control that by putting interest rates up. But what are you doing when you put interest rates up? You're actually taking the people that were in debt at the lower interest rate and sending them bankrupt by increasing the amount that they have to pay on their debt. So the very same people that save the economy are the very same people that need to go bankrupt, so that when you default on your loan, the money supply contracts. This enters into this Ponzi scheme. So if you take the dollar, you gave the history of the dollar. The dollar, you could say in its existing format was, originally we're pre-World War One here, and we have, a gold standard whereby anytime the money supply would increase too much, you'd end up having to settle with another country and send some gold across. And if you printed too much money, you'd end up depleting your gold supply. And so eventually it would cartel how much money was created through the gold standard. And this was kind of like a regulator of international finance. So you don't destroy currencies. Then you had World War One. And at the end of World War One, you had the Treaty of Versailles, which was the agreement where America managed to find a way of funding certain types of wars. And 1913, we had the creation of the Federal Reserve. Prior to that, there were two central banks in America, and literally presidents were assassinated over this argument of whether you should give the power to create money to a private bank. The American Civil War was actually funded by government created money, not central bank created money. And it was debt-free money, and it was called the greenback. It still exists today. And Abraham Lincoln actually just printed up some notes to fund that. But in the Treaty of Versailles, essentially, if you could stay out of the war, think of today, what's China doing? China is stay out of the war and allow everyone else to do what they need to do. So in the World War One era, Britain was the empire, and America was the fast-growing economy that could fund the wars and ensure that their country doesn't get blown up. And England did get blown up, and so all the bombing happened in Europe, and it expanded into various other areas. And then eventually, America got itself in a position where UK was destroyed, its supplies were destroyed, but it won. And so the losers of the war have to negotiate a deal with the winners of the war. So Germany had to they had to do lots of reparations, they had to negotiate, and America ended up with a massive stockpile of gold because the entire debt of the World War fell on the losing side. And when people don't trust each other's currencies, which happens during war, no one trusts. Look what happened to Russia. Russia, when they invaded Ukraine, their dollars just got deleted. The Russian central bank's dollars got deleted with a flick of a button. So people don't trust each other. So you have to settle with something that no one can create, which was gold. And gold had performed the role of money for 5,000 years. It preserved its value. It doesn't make you rich. It's not an investment. It's a preserver of wealth, and it's performed that role for 5,000 years. So America ended up with a bunch of gold at the same time as ensuring went into World War II and didn't get blown up, and then used hard money and its foundational principles of the U.S. Constitution in order to build out. But in 1913, they also launched a central bank. And so then you go to World War II. What happened during World War II? Well, at the end of it, all the powers sat together, and an economist called John Maynard Keynes from UK essentially said, let's create a new monetary system. And this happens regularly. Because you haven't seen it in your lifetime, it's hard for people to imagine that everyone gets round a table and renegotiates money. Well, that was the Bretton Woods meeting. And in Bretton Woods, they essentially said, well, I tell you what, US has got all this gold that it got from the World War One and prior. Why don't US, you keep the convertibility of your currency into gold. So whenever anyone's got a dollar, it can be exchangeable for a fixed set of gold. But rather than everyone having to clear gold amongst each other, you keep it in Fort Knox, and we'll just trade our currency for a set amount of dollars. So your currency is convertible to gold, but everyone else can convert it into dollars. And at the time, John Maynard Keynes proposed a different proposal. It was called the Bancor, and it was a global world reserve currency. But America managed to get it where the dollar became the reserve currency. And so through this privilege, it also created another organization called the International Monetary Fund. And the International Monetary Fund, their job was to get large loans that would create vast amounts of dollars and get people into dollar debts globally, and tie and connect those loans to having to spend the money back in America. So remember, every fiat currency is a Ponzi scheme, right? You have to create more of it. And if as long as you can keep getting more and more of it created through more and more debt, and people are willing to buy that debt, then you can keep the Ponzi scheme alive. And so the IMF was just a way of getting the world addicted to dollars. And so the world became addicted to dollars. And the reason that it was doing that is because it was backed by that gold, and it had, the capitalist free market growth that it had at the time. It just had this massive, massive growth effect, became the next empire, and everyone wanted dollars. So everyone would borrow dollars. But the problem is when you borrow dollars and you can't print it, and America negotiates saying, yeah, we'll lend you $1 billion, but you've got to spend the money back in America. The problem is that you've now created the money a debt, and that debt exists in the other country, but they can't print the currency to pay it, whereas America can print the currency to pay it. And so this is exactly what happened with the British Empire. You create this network effect, like we did it with Africa and India and through colonialism, where you could essentially print the money and get the other country in debt, and then the debt reaches the end of its cycle and it ends in a brutal war. And you just have this cyclical thing that keeps happening. So then you went to 71.
But
So in
so just
19
real quick, there's a book called Confessions of an Economic Hitman that talks a lot about how they were, doing these big, huge infrastructure type projects and loaning out all this money. And so the guy that John Perkins is who wrote that book, and he so he basically talks about how they did in Indonesia, Panama, Ecuador, I mean, Colombia, I mean, a bunch of different places, but this was, and I think Iran, Saudi Arabia, I'm trying to remember. But yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, yeah, so continue. I just wanted to recommend that book for
Yeah,
people that want to know more.
awesome. So yeah, John was an economic hitman that worked for the IMF, and he shared his confessions about the types of things he had to do and the trauma he was experiencing as a result of the actions that his guilt was no longer able to justify. And so he ended up in ayahuasca in the Amazon rainforest, just trying to redeem himself from the sins of all the evils that was created from his time at the IMF. So then we hit 71. And so 71 is right. We're creating more and more and more. The debt's increasing. We're rolling over the Ponzi. But a lot of our gold is leaving. And so in 71, they decided to remove the convertibility of the dollar to gold, and it became a full fiat currency. And fiat currency means that it's not backed by anything. It's just the credit rating and the faith in the system. And because it's a Ponzi scheme, you always have to find somebody else. So it's why there's always a crisis every 10 years in fiat currency. You either have to get individuals to take on more debt, credit cards, student loans, mortgages, or you have to get businesses to take on more debt. So you get corporate debt, you get junk bonds, you get large corporate loans, infrastructure loans, or you have to get the government to take on more debt, so they issue more bonds, and as long as people will buy those bonds, and when the whole thing collapses, you just get the central bank to take it on, and you just keep adding it to the balance sheet, and you just keep going and going and going until you hit the stage where the US is where it is right now. So in 71, that's about 50 years ago, or 53 years ago. Then you hit 2022, Russia invades Ukraine, and America has been on a sanction spree where, because it now controls the dollar and it's not backed by anything, and people are saving in it because they kept buying US government debt, other central banks started holding their reserves in the dollar, not just gold. They started holding it in the dollar. And so when Russia finds itself with $350 million, and then America says, do what we say, or we'll delete it, the entire world says, holy shit, I'm not holding the dollar anymore. And so in 22, you had the final stage. So ever since then, we've had exponential growth in the money supply where people are buying dollars until eventually you can't sell any more government debt. And the central bank's balance sheet is complete. And this always happens. It happened to Britain. It happened to the Dutch Empire previously. It happened to the Roman Empire. It happened to every single empire. Every fiat currency lasts an average of 87 years. The longest standing one was 347 years, which was Britain, because it was backed by the world's largest naval fleet. And the dollar is backed by the world's largest foreign policy. And so therefore, but at some stage in every fiat currency, the cost of maintaining the military industrial complex and the empire becomes unprofitable. And so that's the stage where America is right now. It's no longer profitable. They got $34 trillion of debt on a $27 trillion economy. If you look at something like Russia, that's a $2.2 trillion economy on $500 billion of debt. It's why it could get sanctioned and it could still carry on as if nothing had ever happened. And so once you hit those debt to GDP ratio, the America right now is exactly where Britain was. And it's normally a 10 to 20 year transition where you don't necessarily destroy your currency in a hyperinflationary cycle, like you saw with like the Roman empires and various other ones. That can happen if you keep rolling over the Ponzi, or you can accept that there's a slow transition like de-dollarization, where you've made so many enemies that people stop wanting to transact in your currency and they say, screw Swift. Swift is a mechanism for controlling our financial transactions. We'll create another one. Well, what technology exists today? All right, yeah, well, that technology, that thing called Bitcoin, that produced something really interesting. Could we use that technology, but we want to control it all? And what else could we do with that? Well, maybe we could build a currency where we could actually programmatically change the supply based upon a few inputs, and we could say, well, we want you to spend your money. Let's just put some negative interest rate in there. We don't like the fact that you didn't get a vaccine, so therefore you get penalized with your dollar. We don't like, we think that you just transact. So you're sat on Zoom and you did a financial transaction with somebody in China. We don't like China. And maybe it went through a bank account in Mexico. And we're trying to have some border control policy in Mexico. Why don't we programmatically implement a penalty into that transaction where rather than all of us arguing over tax, we program that into the system? And you can imagine every single iteration. And you know what? We'll all do it, because the inevitable, predictable, and guaranteed result of a fiat currency and a Ponzi scheme is that you'll end up with some kind of technology like a central bank digital currency. So it is the future of all fiat currency. You can't fight it. It's coming. Trump could say he's not going to do it. It's coming to America. It's coming to China. It's coming to every single country. And the only thing you can do is figure out how to protect yourself from that system. Because when you turn up and there's and they don't like how you spend your money, or they think you should have paid some tax in China, but you didn't, and it didn't get programmatically put into it, they can connect that with your digital ID. And if you think that America doesn't and England don't have social credit scores right now, carbon credits, digital IDs, central bank digital currency, FICO scores, data from your Facebook, data from your Twitter, backdoors to governments. If you don't think that we've already got the equivalent of a social credit system in our country right now, you haven't got to grips with what's already happening.
Absolutely. Oh my God. Okay. I didn't know if you were going to go there and how much you knew about that, but apparently you definitely do. And yes, he nailed it. So just so you guys understand a little bit more about the approach, the Bank of International Settlements, which is the central bank of central banks, and they published a blueprint for the future monetary system and kind of described how this would work. And so essentially, it's the tokenization of everything. And so the monetary, it's like a tokenizing the monetary system in terms of interoperability as well as programmability for contingent performance and being able to execute smart contracts. And this is against real-time data. So they're taking all this data and moving it into this unified ledger, which is executing contracts like real time. So for instance, let's just say, if you had X amount of, I don't know, that's probably not a good example. But it would based on like you wanted, this contract to go through when this parameter is reached and the data that is sending it up there wouldn't recognize it, it would do that. So, and now overall, when there is this very, very centralized, I mean, anytime we move power into one central location, it is it is at high risk of being weaponized against you in some way. And if you think about how they tried very hard to get compliance around vaccines and all of that, I mean, they even went down to, kind of using OSHA and all these other things to get people fired from their jobs because they didn't really have a direct mechanism to prevent you from spending money or to cut you off and to make you comply. This is going to allow for that type of tyranny to be executed a lot easier. And so for this unified ledger, what I found also very problematic about it is that the transition of ownership of things like homes and cars, everything that would be essentially tokenized, your bank deposits, everything, those would happen in the ledger. And it cuts out a lot of the middlemaning. And, so a lot of these companies that currently do this eventually wouldn't do it anymore because it's going to be done within the system. And so it's going to be extremely difficult to transact unless there's another system that is, expanding and being adopted as fast as that would be under some sort of, I think they're probably going to use some sort of crisis to bring it into play, because one thing that's missing from the blueprint is how they would plan to implement it. They've been doing pilots, and they've pushed it out to a few countries. I know Nigeria, and they had a 12-week pilot in New York, and I mean it's in a lot of countries, but it shows that I think 193 countries are eventually they're in some phase of either developing or implementing or trying to get the process together. But like he said, so the digital ID is going to essentially be the primary key to you as an individual within the system. And every CBDC that is issued to your primary ID is tracked and traced and surveilled. So it really is problematic, especially knowing how tyrannical these global organizations are, and what they're trying to do in terms of moving all the power into one centralized area. So I don't know if you are familiar with how like the different so in this they talk about the different kinds of coins. They call it stable coins within the blueprint. But it's essentially always trying to compare the differences between what the CBDC would do and what stablecoins would do. It doesn't mention Bitcoin, though, of course, right? Because it doesn't want it. It can't necessarily probably defend its vulnerabilities against a system that would essentially be unexploitable. But if you wanted to kind of talk about anything else that around the CBDCs, and if you have any idea about how they would be planning to implement it, and then we'll bring people up here to ask any questions. If you have questions and you want to ask Simon, request to speak, and I'll bring you up. But yeah, go and hi. I just wanted to say hi to Jen. I see you up here. Thanks for coming up.
Hey, Mace, I'm very impressed. You did your research for this one. You've been going down the rabbit hole. Um, so yeah, CBDCs, they have almost every single country has either a pilot program or they're in an advanced stage. There's a number of them that have been launched. The first one I remember was around about 2015 in Barbados. And the one that has the highest supply, if you pull up this is the type of geek I am, if you pull up a balance sheet for the People's Bank of China, PBOC, you'll see a little entry line for DCEP, and DCEP is the central bank digital currency of China. It went into a pilot program, and essentially it issues the funds, and it's about just under 1% of the money supply at the moment. The way CBDCs will happen is through crisis. So we already know how it will happen. And this was the book I wrote in 2011, that because fiat currencies are Ponzi schemes, you have to deleverage a fiat currency in order to keep it in existence. And so the reason that Bitcoin doesn't really go in the same conversation as a CBDC, even though the technology for a CBDC kind of came from Bitcoin, is because CBDCs compete with banks. This is the bit that people don't understand. Bitcoin doesn't compete with banks. Bitcoin competes with gold. Bitcoin is hard money. Hard money because it is programmatically impossible to change. And this is what makes Bitcoin different from any other cryptocurrency. It was created at a time when no one gave a shit. When I was at those first Bitcoin conferences, we were there to take on the banks. We were there about creating freedom and a financial system. None of us were in it for the money. We were there to really change the world, and we were all completely deluded. We should never have succeeded. It was a thing that was never going to succeed. It was just a crazy thing. And the design of it is actually backed by electricity. People think it's backed by nothing, but there's all these miners around the world that spend electricity, and it's actually becoming really efficient. So there's a whole industry that's coming right now where if you've got excess electricity, they're actually mining Bitcoin in order to repurpose that excess electricity. And there's a whole industry around all the ESG stuff. And by the way, every individual is going to have an ESG score and a carbon credit score. Everyone's going to have these in the future. So how you spend your CBDC will give you, they'll just add another little score on top of your FICO score, whether you're environmentally friendly, what you're doing with it. So everyone's going to have these scores. You'll all have social credit scores, not far away.
Ooh, actually, let me
Um,
add this in because I cover global affairs and I cover the United Nations all the time. I'm talking about I always talk about the Sustainable Development Goals and how that essentially ties into the crisis factor. It's like the existential threats that are going to be used to get your buy-in for the for the policies, for safety, basically, right? So you have the World Health Organization with the pandemics, and then you have the climate crisis, and then, you have all of these sustainable development goals that are going to be your compliance into achieving the outcome, that they're foreseeing with this, which is, come to my Friday space, Friday at 6 p.m. And we can kind of go over that. But so there's this, there's a way to be able to not only impact you, but anything up and downstream to you. Like if you're a business or if you're a corporation, let's just say, this is forcing compliance because it's already right now in the index. SPG Global is basically, what they're doing is just saying like which companies are investable and which ones aren't, and it's kind of based on this way that they're scoring you. Now this is incorporated into their scoring system, and that's just one example, but it's going to impact how you're able to get loans, how you're able to just operate, like and function normally within a society. And if you are doing anything that is going to ding you, then anything upstream and downstream, your suppliers or whoever you distribute to, your distributors, they would all be impacted by it. And so then they would want to switch because they don't want to be impacted by it. And so then it puts pressure on you and your business and, your ability to make any profit, because of that. So this is like a peer forced compliance, if that makes sense. It's crazy, but I would say that it's diabolically genius, to a degree, because a lot of people are going to be forced into having to comply with things that they may not agree with. It's crazy, but yeah, go ahead, Simon.
yeah, sure. So yeah, that's it's all coming. All those things are the foundation and fabrics there. So where you get to this whole tokenization, stablecoin, CBDC. So essentially, a bunch of us were messing around with Bitcoin. The community was really small. And then round about 2011, 2012, the industry started saying, well, we've actually made this way where people can own their own money, spend their own money, and no one can change the supply. And the industry is just getting more and more secure. And we've created the world's largest distributed supercomputer in the world that no one can control and no one can change. And all governments tried to, and then they failed one by one. Um, and so then we were like, well, what else can we do with Bitcoin? And so there was this whole thing called, let's create colored coins. And we were like, can we put stocks on a Bitcoin? Can we like mess around with the code? And then that was like something that people were really trying this. And then this developer called Vitalik, who was a journalist for a Bitcoin magazine, he decided to create his own blockchain that ended up being called Ethereum. He went out to all the Bitcoiners and said, hey, can you chuck in some Bitcoin? I'm going to create this new blockchain. And then we had really the first iteration of something that looks kind of decentralized, but it was actually created by people. And then the people become the attack vector, and then they print a bunch of currency in the beginning. And so you have this thing that kind of confuses people and looks like Bitcoin, but it's not Bitcoin. And then everyone tried to print money and print money and print money. I invested in this exchange called Bitfinex, and they said, can we create a digital dollar? Because our customers want to engage in trading, but the price of Bitcoin on another exchange is different from the price of Bitcoin on this exchange. And then when they try to take advantage of that to make the price efficient, they got to try and get it into the bank, and no bank will open us. And so all these exchanges couldn't get bank accounts. And so they just said, well, why don't we create a digital dollar where someone puts $1 in our bank and we'll create a token? And as long as it's backed by dollars, it should always be valued at a dollar. And that was the creation of the stablecoin. It took years till anyone would use it, but eventually it started to become incredibly useful in China from people that wanted to transact dollars, and then people were trading it between exchanges, and it became this way of getting your money from one exchange to another. Now, that is a very disruptive concept, getting it from one exchange to another, backed by a dollar without a bank in the middle. Remember what I said about fractional reserve banking, that every dollar in a bank is somebody else's debt? Well, the biggest problem to banking is full reserve banking. And stablecoin is backed by dollars. And then they started investing those dollars. So they started investing it and saying, well, we've got all this money sat at a bank, and more people want these stable coins, and it's backed by all this money. And suddenly we've got billions and billions just sat in a bank. Why don't we just lend it to the government? And so they buy some treasuries. And so suddenly this new source of funding to the government came from stable coins, where essentially, rather than sitting there, we give someone this digital dollar that you can send without a bank. It's backed by dollars, but why don't we get some interest from it and lend it to the government? So the government would then pay a percentage coupon, and Bitfinex would then take some of that, and it created this thing called Tether. And then they could buy some Bitcoin with the interest. So basically, they were getting a free Bitcoin position from the US government by issuing a stable coin, that they were getting interest-free money and backing it by US government debt, and then using the coupon in order to buy Bitcoin. And so they ended up with all these Bitcoins, and it was just this amazing thing. And then so the central banks and then Facebook came along and said, hold on. What's this company doing here? What are these guys doing here? We've got 2 billion users. Why don't we create a world reserve digital dollar? And we'll back it by a bunch of other currencies. And so they created the Libra project. And then every central banker in the world said, hold on, this would be the biggest bank in the world. It would have all of your data, and it will also have a stable coin. And they wanted to back part of it by the Chinese yuan. That's a threat to national security. We've got to make everyone believe that China's the enemy here. We don't want Facebook becoming the next bank, so they shut the project down. And then it just kept growing and growing. And then the central bank said, why can't we do it? Now, here's the problem. Think about it. So the banks have the ability to create money backed by debt. But look what happened in 2023. In 2023, you had the bank run crisis in the US. Started with Silicon Valley Bank. It was a bunch of banks that were actually engaged with cryptocurrency companies. SBF became a fraud. People got scared. Everyone started withdrawing their deposits. Silicon Valley started withdrawing masses. Peter Thiel goes on Twitter Spaces and says, hey, I'm withdrawing. And they crash a bank. They kill the bank because the withdrawals just means that they can no longer do it. And so suddenly the bank has to start selling off its treasuries. When it's selling off its treasuries, he has to sell them at a discount. Why? Because the Fed had hiked the rates. Remember, it's trying to control this bogey called inflation. So it's hiking the rates. So everyone that's lending money to the government, they want their 5%. They don't want the shitty old treasuries that are only paying 1%. And so they have to sell these treasuries to meet depositors' demand at a massive discount and lock in a loss. There is $650 billion of losses sat in the US banking system right now. FDIC only insures 1% of all deposits in the US banking system. So you've got this, and remember, FDIC has failed in the past, the savings and loan crisis. They literally had to bail it out and roll over. So deposit insurance only allows for one of those banks to go bust. They had to create a new tool. And so that is the weakness within the fractional reserve banking system. But what if everyone can switch it? What if they said, you know what? That financial crisis thing led to people rioting in the streets. What if we just let the bank go bust? And then everyone, all they need to do, you had $10,000 at Chase. Why don't you just download this app and agree to the terms and conditions, and you can have your $10,000 back? But this time, it's going to be issued by a central bank digital currency, and there's going to be no bank in the middle. And then all the other people, you can literally crash the entire banking system. And this almost happened in 2023, by the way. So one of the companies that had an account at Silicon Valley Bank was a company I invested in called Circle. And Circle created the second largest stablecoin, and $3 billion of its reserves were held at Silicon Valley Bank. When Silicon Valley Bank went bust, the price of that stablecoin started depegging and trading at a discount, because they knew that, $3 billion of the funds is actually in a bank that may go bust, that FDIC can't actually cover. And so the Fed's going to have to kick in. And it was only when the Fed kicked in that it kind of went back to its dollar trading price. And so they know the biggest risk to fractional reserve banking is full reserve banking, which is stable coins. And what do you want in case that happens? You need a central bank digital currency to allow the banks to go bust, and everyone signs up to the terms and conditions because they want their deposit back that they held at the bank, and that's the drug. Then if you need some universal basic income in order to do a stimulus, so you need some helicopter money, screw sending checks in the post. Let's just send them some CBDCs. We'll incentivize them as well to do it. You'll all download it. And the user experience of it is going to be brilliant, unless you want to do something that the government may not want you to do. What if you wanted to fund some children in Gaza right now? Do you think that central bank digital currency is going to be able to get there? What do you think is going to happen to your social credit score when you want to do that? What if you wanted to free Assange? What if you wanted to free Ross? What if you wanted to contribute to WikiLeaks? What if you wanted to buy some Bitcoin? And that's where we end up. And it's going to be done through crisis. And the reason it's inevitable, predictable, and guaranteed is because every single fiat currency is already a Ponzi scheme. So in the end, every day, capitalist countries like America, like UK, they look more and more like China every day, and China looks more and more like America every day, and they'll meet in the middle with a central bank digital currency and look identical, all working off the same government systems. And I'm sure at that stage, they'll say, these central bankers, they're bloody crazy. Look what they're doing. They're blowing up and committing genocide in Gaza. Artificial intelligence can do that at a much better way. So you have an artificial intelligence central bank digital currency in the end. And here's a good look. I'll give you a good look for it. That sounds really utopian, sounds really Orwellian. It is pretty Orwellian. But imagine if everyone could issue a central bank digital currency and you actually put more freedom into your CBDC. You actually allowed people to back it by Bitcoin. And this gets to the Bank for International Settlements that you covered. That's operating out of Hong Kong. And it's a bridge between, countries like BRICS countries, and the BRICS, they're building all the technology right now to be able to trade between those that have been most fucked by the dollar. Excuse my French. And so they're building those settlement layers between CBDCs. But what if you could choose think about this. What if you chose your currency not by the country you were born in, but by your ideology? What if you said, I'm going to pick my CBDC based upon the policy of the country that I'm most ideological aligned with? So if I don't like the Iranian government, or I don't like the US government, or I don't like that, these are completely interoperable, and people choose their currency based upon the ideology and the ethics of that country. And so you have this technology where it's not based upon where you're from. And then in 2025, they implement the laws of how you can back CBDCs by stable coins, by Bitcoin, by altcoins. And people can, countries can decide to have the soundest form of CBDC money backed by Bitcoin that allows you to borrow against your Bitcoin, which historically has gone up in value, and then be able to spend it with a stable coin. All of this is actually being coded up right now in front of us. And we could end up in a really, really interesting free market where you could choose the currency that gives you the most amount of freedom. And that may not be the dollar. Maybe that keeps governments more honest. Maybe, just maybe, that means that countries decide who they're going to blow up and I call it a proof of weapons network of fiat currency, because Bitcoin is a proof of work network. It's backed by electricity. fiat currencies are backed and CBDCs are backed by how much you're willing to spend. The British colonial naval fleet model digitized into the future, and now it's getting into AI warfare and all sorts of stuff. So we have a really interesting time ahead of us, and I think we're going to see all of this. I'm 43. I think we're going to see all of this in our lifetime, and I plan to be around. And I hope people understand that there is an exit from the system, and that exit is the one currency and the one physical and digital, which is gold and Bitcoin, that no government in the world can do a damn thing about. And they'd love to if they could.
Oh my God, I'm having a whole fireworks show in my head right now because I never ever even thought or fathomed how this could actually be something, a tool, a way that the people can show, like where they support the ideology that holds your government account. Oh my God, I can't even. Listen, I know there's a lot of people up here that want to ask questions. I'm still in awe of that idea. In fact, it's amazing. I'm so glad this is recorded. I mean, I'm curious to know what you guys think about it. I would love to hear from. Let's go ahead and go with Jen, and then we'll go to Gen X, and then we'll go to V, and then I think did he drop? Oh, Satoshi dropped. Okay, go ahead. Oh, there he is. Go ahead, Gen X. Welcome.
Maze, I think you're kind of slow playing this thing. I know I told you about Mount Gox, and you know the backstory. But Jake Simon, this is something that a lot of people coming to this have a really hard time with. And I think especially for the older folks, if you were to really explain to them the backstory, it helps make more sense to people as to why there is a threat to their value and time and energy being debased. So I think you give a really good explanation on that stuff. So my question for Simon is, you're one of the few people. I remember like when Andreas was talking to the Canadian Senate and just looking at their faces when he was explaining to them that, yeah, you're not going to control this. The market's going to control it and make the decisions. But they were very open to listening. But I appreciate you giving that backstory, and you've been in this longer than most people. And just a reminder that most of those accounts at SVB, they had well over the 250K FDIC insured amount. And my personal opinion is they forced them to close. They had buyers and they didn't allow them to continue. Anyway, my question, I know there's people waiting, so I'll just stick with one. For Simon, what are your thoughts on, there's been a couple states in the US that are already putting forth legislation against CBDCs. Where do you think that will go? And do you see that happening in Europe at all? And I have just one quick follow-up.
Yeah, sure. So firstly, it's completely unconstitutional. And my favorite part of America, and there's, having been giving commentary on these wars and stuff, people often confuse me with thinking I'm like anti-American and stuff. I'm anti-oppression, and whenever oppression occurs in any government, including my own, and I criticize my own government. In fact, I left my country because I didn't agree with the way it was governed. But um, I don't think like that. But I have had several experiences of working with countries to try and get them to engage in Bitcoin. I'll share some of those stories because they were really interesting for me, anyway. But it's definitely unconstitutional. But so was a lot of the anti-money laundering policies that got implemented after you create fear in the world. And so were many of the things that happened with privacy. And so were many of the anti-terrorism, anti-drug wars, and all those things. So you get to change it when people are scared the most. And so I think you will get CBDCs in America, whether it's the last country to do it. The country that has the most power right now might be the last one to do it. And the one that has the most to gain are the ones that can be more speculative, and you can kind of have a bit of a flippening. But I do think it's a worthy fight. But in all my time of trying to work with the establishment, work with governments, work with banks, and I've been doing it for 20 years, the thing that I found most productive is just be able to exit the system and let them do what they want to do. And so I have no fear of CBDCs anymore because the world gave me Bitcoin. If the world didn't give me Bitcoin, I would be scared shitless of where this is all going. Because I already know right now, my money in my bank account is not mine. I can't spend it. And I accept already that if I want to spend my money and do a significant transaction around the world, I'm going to have to give them every type of data. It took me 9 months to buy my house because I wanted to buy it with Bitcoin. And I had to go back to every single transaction that I was mining in order to be able to put it into the bank and prove that I didn't earn that through crime. And that's 9 months of due diligence just to be able to purchase a house. Why? Because I didn't need a mortgage. And just because I didn't need a mortgage, it meant that they could not fathom the thought that someone could actually be able to buy that house without debt. And therefore, they do everything to deter you from being able to spend your own money and get in the way of that.
Yes, sir.
So I think America should fight against them, but I think they're inevitable, and I think they're coming everywhere, and it will be in fear. It will always be in fear.
Thanks so much, Simon. I have several questions, but I want to be mindful of the other people waiting. If you could just weigh in on, a lot of us we're very clear on this, on the importance of self-custody. And with all the people who are coming into this new, especially the older folks looking at ETFs, would you mind sharing with the audience, since I'm a nobody, they won't listen to me, and that's fine, fuck them. But oh, by the way, if there's any shitcoiners out there, I'm not a maxi that's gonna tell you not to buy that. I think you should keep buying whatever you do. That'll give me some more time and my kids to stack. But could you just tell the audience your perspective on the importance of self-custody and not people taking money, their energy, and setting themselves for another rug pull with an ETF, please?
Yeah, sure. So Bitcoin's a journey. It's a really strange concept for people to understand that owning their own asset, because the way the digital system works is it always required somebody else's ledger in order for your asset to exist. And so, think about your bank deposit is simply somebody else's debt on a ledger, and you need the bank in order to create that ledger and maintain that ledger. But at any stage, they can decide whether you're able to spend it, whether you're able to do anything. And even famous examples, extreme examples, was when the Americans had to hand in all their gold, and gold was confiscated, and it was illegal to own gold. And there was activist movement just to allow Americans to own gold, even though the U.S. Constitution says that money has to be backed by gold, and it's actually a constitutional. The founding fathers really understood this shit, but we just got complacent over time and just accepted the convenience of it. So there is a challenge: is that the true power of Bitcoin is owning your own Bitcoin. And that's one of the most important things that Bitcoin gave to the world. Most people, when they own gold, they hold it at a custodian. And during COVID, that no one could get their gold and everyone was creating paper contracts for that gold. More gold existed through the paper contracts. And then when you have these times when everyone needs their gold, you can't fly over to Switzerland and get your gold. They can't send it. And then suddenly in those extreme times, you realize you don't have the freedom that you thought you had, and you weren't protecting yourself because custodians are in the middle, and by design, because when they want to confiscate, that's exactly what they want. They want an institution and a door that they can knock on. The last thing they want is a bunch of people with a hardware wallet where they can knock on every door in every house, which is why they took all the gold in America and put it in a centralized depository and gave everyone custodians. And so that's the drug. That's the removal of freedom. Now, I also recognize the practicality that some people, they just want to buy a bit of Bitcoin. And sometimes you have to experience a bit of Bitcoin. And now BlackRock, Fidelity, all these different financial institutions have take Bitcoin and they've repurposed them as shares. So you can now buy them from within your retirement account. And there's tax benefits to buying it within your retirement account, because then you can put it in your Roth IRA or your defer the tax. Whereas when you own things, you have to pay the tax on those things. And so there's this whole friction between ownership and not owning. I actually do a little bit of hedging on that. Most people will say, not your keys, not your coins. This kind of Andreas was the one that created that phrase in the really early Bitcoin presentations, because you can own the key and you can take that value over anywhere in the world, at a scale that is just simply not possible within the normal banking system. So self-ownership is really a journey. And so some people, they'll come in through ETFs or they'll hold them through Mt. Gox, or they'll hold them at an exchange. But eventually what you have to learn how to do is store your own. And that's when you get freedom. The day you recognize that you're locked down in a house and you can transact with anybody in the world with no intermediary in any amount of value, is the day you realize that's financial freedom. And financial freedom is freedom of speech. And freedom of speech is carteled by allowing somebody else to store your value. And when you store your own value, that changes the world.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, Maze. Thanks for your patience. And yeah, for me personally, the fact that I had to leave my own country and go to Norway to work unless I vaccinated myself and my family, it sounds really grim, but I've been in Bitcoin for some time, not as long, nowhere near as long as you. But the fact that I did that and went against the grain and didn't follow what these other archaic systems and people are saying, who really just don't have time to look up. If I had not done that, like, I try and think back, where would I be? Because I've done some stuff with Bitcoin that I never could have done before for what I think is important in life, like each of you. Yeah, fuck these people. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Janex. One thing just to also highlight, like when it comes to data and all the things that we have to do when we go and apply for a loan, they're getting that information because you're borrowing. So any transaction with Bitcoin, because it's not a debt-based system, it eliminates the burden of all of this, and then what the potential weaponization of data has in store, I guess, for that's another time, another space. But I think that's huge. And again, I'm not, there's no financial advice given here. We're just discussing some of the key things that lessons learned is that when you are allowing institutions to be custodians to anything, it is exploitable. And then I've had spaces where we read the entire white paper and had a whole bunch of people on the panel to answer questions, and just to understand how a distributed and what did you call them, protocols, and how it works and how it's just not exploitable was incredibly beneficial for many of the people that just had no idea, like, how does this whole thing work? And I just wanted to ask a quick question. Well, I'm going to save my question for last. Let's let's go to V first, and then we'll go to Sato, because I know mine's loaded. Let's go to V. Hi, V. Welcome in.
Hey, Maze, thanks very much for the mic, and thanks, Simon, for for the discussion. I've been following for quite some time, and I've been in this space for about, and I'm not talking about this particular space, but the crypto space or blockchain, since about 8 years now. Um, you're right. I think
Maze, I can't
CBDCs.
hear V. Is it just me?
Oh, yeah. Let me move you down and bring you
I
right
can
back up
be.
then.
All right, I'll step down.
I agree. I think the CBDCs will come, and they'll be here, obviously, in the Western world, or be it America, Europe, etc. Maybe all over the world. But in my view, that's literally just a hijack of what blockchain and Bitcoin, because obviously this was the first project. Uh, it's really meant to be doing, and you touched on these points really well with obviously self custody. But reading about it for so long as well, I think at the root of all this, it's literally a fight between the old world and the new world. And I'm not talking about just the financial um, system that we live in today, but it's a fight between centralization and decentralization. Because if you think about it, we all need to rely on these banks or any other third parties to hold our value, And then, as you rightly say, you realize you don't really own that money, because when you try to get that money out from the system, it's not that easy as you imagine. Um, and you've described it. If you're outside the system and you're trying to purchase something, then they'll try to understand why have you not been part of the system, or which is crazy. So, even if, and most likely CBDCs will come and will happen probably, to me that's the last fight, of the current system trying to literally grip, the old, from the old system, saying no, 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 we still control everything. But eventually, because the technology is out there, the cat is literally out of the bag, you cannot put it back in. Decentralization eventually will win. It will give the power to everyone to control, their own value, and become its own bank effectively, because you're not going to be needing a third party bank to keep your value. Um, and just to touch on a few other points, I think everything is going to be tokenized. I mean, personally, yes, Bitcoin is a great decentralized system, but I think there will be more others built on the same model. And I know there's a great discussions here, and I don't want to get into it, because this next future financial system that'll come, and it's hopefully going to be truly decentralized, will have to be tokenized with everything around us, not just obviously money. It will have to be the value, of everything that we use, including maybe commodities like gold, silver, etc., or even the products of our economies, or I don't know. I mean, I, I I don't think we can even imagine, how this new financial world is going to look into the next, I don't know, 50 years from now. It will probably become, it'll be worse a bit with the attempt of CBDCs to capture all of this, or still try to reel us, back on the centralized world. But eventually, I think we're just going to break free out of that crazy system.
Yeah, what I'd say from that is, while I consider myself a refugee from the fiat currency proof of weapons network, it was only for my savings. I We talk about a multipolar world, and we often think about that in terms of government powers. But I think of that in terms of CBDCs and Bitcoin. So I think it's healthy to have competition. I think it's healthy. I think that Bitcoin actually regulates regulators. Because if there is a threat to people not using your CBDCs, or not, not being able to exit from the financial system, it makes you create your technology better. Now, these two networks, CBDCs and Bitcoin, they don't compete for the same thing. I think that CBDCs will be a great technology for paying your rent, for paying your mortgages, because to me, there's a difference between money to spend and money to save. So when I think about money, or when I think about like finance, I split things up into four. The first thing is I think about my spending money. And the best technology for spending is something that gives you no currency risk. So if your rent is in dollars, you're going to earn in dollars, and you need to pay your rent, and you're not taking much inflation risk in 1 month, then that technology is very hard to disrupt. It's a superior technology, because no one wants currency risk. You don't want to receive some Bitcoin, and then by the time your rent's due, you can't actually afford to pay your, just because you got on the wrong side of a trade. Because currency risk is a real problem. So the best technology for spending is the same currency that you're spending, that is denominated in. And so that creates an interesting thing. But the best technology for saving is something that's designed to combat inflation. And historically, that has been gold, because it stored its value. But Bitcoin created a more scarce technology. It created a monetary system where right now about 19.5 million of all the Bitcoin has been created. There's only ever going to be 21 million of them. There's only 1.5 million of them left to mine. And every 4 years, the number of Bitcoins that get created to reward those mining and verifying the transaction cuts in half until eventually there's no more Bitcoins to create. And so that creates this adoption cycle that has beaten inflation. And bringing savings back into the world is an innovation, because savings disappeared. In a debt-based system, how do you win in a debt-based system? Well, think about the two different types of people. You have people that take out debt in order to consume. They lose. They pay the highest interest rate. They get the payday loan. They get the credit card 27%, 30% interest rate. But those that borrow debt in order to acquire assets, that's the central bank. The closer you are to the central bank, which is the large financial institutions, they can borrow at 0% and lend to the schmuck at 30% and create money in between to get ultra leverage. And so, the people that use the debt system in order to acquire assets, essentially what they're doing is they're exiting the spending system. Because if you save in the same technology that you spend, you lose a lot of money, you get destroyed, you get wrecked. If you save in dollars, that's a sure way to being deep in debt, because you're going to eventually have to supplement your income because you're saving in dollars. And so, you save. So Bitcoin became a saving technology. But then when you have things like stablecoin, you can collateralize your wealth in order to transact in the same value eventually that your rent is being charged in. And then when you were talking about tokenization, so what bucket do I put that in? So there's no competition for hard money. There is nothing that competes with Bitcoin. No matter what anyone tells you, for 15 years or 13, 14 years, I've sat there and watched 10,000 things try to compete in Bitcoin, say, I can do it faster, cheaper, better. And it always ends up a centralized mess, and a glorified central bank using technology. Much like Terra Luna has just become a decentralized central bank that just becomes dependent upon a person and gets shut down by the SEC and knocked on the door and blows up the whole thing. That happens time and time again. But that's the third bucket of money. It's investing. Investing is taking your Bitcoin, your savings, and put it to work to try and earn more. Now, you don't put all of your money in investments. Think about how this changes the world. Just a simple concept of allowing people to save, and that savings beats inflation. Imagine how much difference that would make. Because at the moment, most people in the fiat currency world, they have to take out a loan and they have to leverage real estate, and then they have to beat real estate, and then they have to make investments because they can't save. And then you go to a centralized custodian by opening your Fidelity account, and you end up contributing a set amount a month from your pension so that BlackRock can manage your money and take fees and take more and more fees out of the system, all because there's no savings technology. And then finally, to me, once you've invested, once you've saved, this is the stage of life where I'm at, where you think about, well, how can I contribute? And contribute based upon generating wealth, I think is what we're brought on this earth to do. How can we contribute? How can we use the fact that we were on the right side, or we were able to access saving technology because of the luck of the country that we're born in, and the fact that we were able to exit the proof of weapons network? Then how can we try and make the world a better place and spend your time doing the things? Because with that freedom, it gives you the time to be able to have the contribution. And that's the way that I kind of see things. And by bringing savings back into the equation, remember, savings is long term. If anyone tries to trade Bitcoin, and again, not financial advice, but I've seen people that were involved in the highest performing asset class in history from 2011 that are still in the same financial position they were, even though they were involved in the highest performing financial. It's because they were trading. It's because they were trying to spend their Bitcoin, and it's because they didn't have more than a 4-year time frame. So most people completely undervalue. They completely they end up in a pump and dump scheme because they're trying to make money in cryptocurrency fast, rather than doing the really simple thing which changed my life, which is I just said simply, every month I need to own more Bitcoin than I had the previous month. And that stood the test of time for 13 years. And it's as simple as shit, but very few people did it.
Yeah, I
Very.
think. Sorry, Maze. I agree with that. Fine. I'm okay with all of it. I'm just trying to say that um, if we are to believe, and I agree that CBDCs will be useful in future, and there will be obviously something that will be um, facilitating a movement of money a bit faster, etc. But the risk with that will still be that you'll have that potential control and gateway of whoever controls the system and end up in a similar situation or in a debt system as we are today, because you know Bitcoin is a ray of sunshine at the minute, and it's great. But I'm just afraid that if we don't follow a similar model with CBDCs or anything else really, then we could literally be forgetting about it, and that's really my concern here. So that's why I'm saying that I don't think CBDCs will succeed long term, but you'll still need something. There will be completely decentralized and not controlled by a few parties like today. Like even the central banks and federal, like if you automate everything. I work in finance and also deal with IT as well. So I know that you can literally automate all of this. And, a central ledger, especially with AI coming now and everything else, why do you need people in the middle to issue money for you, or just literally go on a computer and print a sum because the Federal Reserve, decided to? That's
Yeah,
really what I'm
definitely. But
coming from.
don't you think that the next central banker? I never said central bankers are humans.
I know. Sorry, I'm just
I think I
going
think I
further.
think
Yeah.
I think CBDCs won't be created by humans in the future. We're going to have CBDCs everywhere that are going to have algorithms that are going to be created to. They'll be created. I mean, there's no chance that central bankers are going to be able to compete with AI in the next
Yeah,
10, 20 years. No chance.
I agree.
Thank you, V. Did you have anything else, or?
No, thanks very much, Maze. Great spaces as always. Thank you.
Thank you, V. DJ Satoshi. What's up, homie? Jump in.
What's up, Maze? Thank you so much for hosting. Thank you so much for bringing Simon on. He's a legend. He's very smart and really knows his stuff. I've been following Simon, learning about a lot of the things he talks about. So thank you, Simon, for sharing your knowledge, and Maze for allowing this to happen. So thank you, everyone. Simon, a few things, also to be respectful of time, like Gen X said. One thought I just love thinking about is the fact that I think Bitcoin is already the first AI that we've seen, because it is a self-adjusting system. So, the difficulty adjustment is kind of AI in its own way, and it's pretty beautiful. So I think none of these, what you're talking about, like none of these CBDCs and AI are really going to be competitive, other than just fooling people. So I'm just curious to hear how you think this will all play out in the next couple of years, and also what you would recommend to people who are listening who are maybe new to Bitcoin and who haven't really taken the orange pill yet. How would you recommend they learn about it and do it the right way, so that they don't waste their time falling down the crypto shitcoin kind of rabbit holes, that scams rather, that a lot of people are falling prey to now? And one other point I wanted you to clarify, if you don't mind, is what did
Hey,
you
can we? Can
mean?
we? I'll take all your
Yeah,
questions, but my memory can never remember them.
I
So
know, I know. I'll let you go on this one, and then I'll take a follow up if you don't mind.
yeah, cool. So you know, is Bitcoin AI a self-adjusting system? It's beautiful code. It's unbelievably well designed in terms of economics. Technology, always someone can come up with better technology, but nobody can recreate Bitcoin. Nobody has been able to recreate Bitcoin. And if you think it can be recreated, it's because you haven't gone deep enough down the rabbit hole yet. Because it was this immaculate conception. It was the fact that, I mean, I don't want to get too freaky, but to
Do it.
me, to me, to me, Bitcoin is godly money to me. You know, we were given gold; it was put in the ground. But how Satoshi managed in today's world to not be identified, and all major religions in recognized that interest is forbidden, because those prophecies understood that when you create a debt-based Ponzi scheme, you create a lot of oppression in the world. And to me, it's the purest form of money, because it's about generating a wealth effect. It's Austrian economics on a chain. And so to me, there's something really freaky about the conception and inception of Bitcoin. But I know people find that because Bitcoin is a religion at the end of the day. Hard money is a religion because it's so profound. But yeah, no, I do think I do believe in a multipolar world. So I do think you will, just because something's amazing doesn't mean everyone uses that amazing. And I think the friction between central bank digital currencies and Bitcoin is important. In terms of like the whole how do you get started? Um, to me, the best way of learning is through experiential learning, and so there are many ways of buying some Bitcoin, tiny bit. You don't have to, don't put your life savings in it. Don't put any of those things until you're at the stage where you've kind of financially managed that. But once you put a little bit of Bitcoin on your own device, on your own hardware wallet, and these are just things, we didn't know how to use an iPhone. We didn't know how to use Twitter Spaces. But one day we said, I have to. And unfortunately, most people only do things they have to when it's too late. And so I think people should do it before it's too late. The time to understand banking is not when you're in a Cypriot bank crisis and they do a bail-in. The time to understand FDIC insurance is not when you get the next bank loan crisis. The time to understand these things is try and get them before they happen. And so, yeah, it's start small and then realize that the best. I couldn't quite. There was a time when, in the beginning, I couldn't quite fully understand how mining worked. And there was like, okay, so I put some of this on my phone, and then I send a transaction, and then this little thing comes up saying one confirmed transaction. I'm like, who confirmed that? And then I sent it to someone, and someone said, oh, I can see you received the money. And I was like, how do you know you received the money? Where did you get that record? And I was like, oh, right, you can see a bit of my transaction history. I better use another type of wallet. And so just experience it. When you do that first bleep and you realize you've got value on your phone and you can send it to anyone, anywhere, that also is able to access the internet, it just blows the mind. Just like being on these Twitter Spaces, it blows my mind every day that we get to experience through this technology, that I could speak to people in Lebanon, in Iran, in Israel, in Gaza, in America, in UK, and we can all come together while we're witnessing some of the most horrific things that I've ever seen, and they're able to share their story, and we're able to circumvent the propaganda that we would have got by watching it on TV. And we all get to rally together and understand the human side of different people and how they experience things. And you're saying, oh yeah, people in Iran think this. Well, then someone from Iran comes up and say, well, no, I think this. And the fact that we all get to come together from all these different cultural backgrounds, it blows my mind every day that we're able to do this and we're able to even engage in this conversation. Um, it is. There's so much shit happening in the world, but at the same time, imagine being alive in World War One when you needed to watch a TV to find out whether it was safe enough to come out of your house. If you were lucky enough to be able to afford a TV through the propaganda of whatever the government shit wanted you to believe at the time. And now we can literally just come straight on and we can transact some value with each other. There's a lot of challenges. There's a lot of censorship. There's a lot of problems. There's data. But this is the friction of the world that we live in. But I couldn't imagine being alive in any other time than today. What an amazing time it is, despite all the shit that we're seeing. At least we get the truth. How amazing is that? Just think of that as a concept, the truth. We
Yeah.
get to understand our own truth.
Yeah, it's beautiful, Simon, and that's why I really love the way you speak and you elaborate, like you really clearly explain kind of like Bitcoin's proposition to so many people. So thank you for doing that, and I hope you continue to. One follow-up I would ask is you mentioned tonight Bitcoin set the way for CBDCs. So can you explain what you mean that, like basically it sounded to me like you were saying without Bitcoin, CBDCs wouldn't even exist. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, so maybe I push back on myself on that as well, because I think actually CBDCs are probably not going to use blockchain in the end. Some will just try and create the fastest centralized databases, PayPal systems, and just create another type of system. And obviously everyone's going to try and own the network. So, Ripple wanted to create technology to own the network so that everyone can build on top of that. And then they could become the next central banker in JP Morgan. And all the shareholders that invested in it could say, I control the financial system. And that's kind of, the route that all of these different types of systems are going down. And so the evolution was, well, we created this concept called blockchain. And around about 2013, the bankers tried to hijack Bitcoin by telling everyone, hey, you don't need Bitcoin. There's this thing called blockchain. Forget Bitcoin. And they tried to hijack the name and tell everyone Bitcoin bad, blockchain good. I remember an investment bank called Jefferies. They asked me, I don't know why I ended up doing this, but I did it. They asked me to go around and do a tour across Tokyo, Singapore, Hong Kong, New York, Boston, and all these other major, and they invited me to speak to pretty much most of the fund managers managing most of the money in the world. And they asked me to pitch Bitcoin to them. And at the same time, there was Blythe Masters was telling the whole world, Bitcoin bad, blockchain good. And she created this company where she was going to create her distributed ledger technology, and she was going to put stocks on. But for those who don't know Blythe Masters, she was from JP Morgan and invented the credit default swap. And so my job was to go and tell everyone that blockchain shit, because it requires this token, and this token has to be decentralized, and it has to be something that someone else didn't create, and Bitcoin's that value, and owning your own money, spending your own money, fixed supply, no one can change, freedom. And she was going around saying the exact opposite. Yeah, it was an interesting time. That was the 2014 times, and there was a real movement. The word blockchain was really a hijacking from the banks in order to try and oppress Bitcoin. But a good idea just can't be oppressed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, I just lost one of my co-hosts. Let me get him back up here. Thanks, DJ Satoshi. Let's go to Lumi, and then Vincent, and then Naja.
Hi,
I sent you the
Maze, and
code.
hi, Simon.
Hi,
Thank you for
Lumi.
having me on. Oh, can you hear me?
Yep,
Yeah,
loud and clear.
perfect. Yes, I'm going to be quick. I'm going to make a few points and lead up with one question. You said that Bitcoin was religious, Simon. I'm a big fan, and my thinking is this, is that we might see one day a church of Satoshi or something similar to that as a tax-efficient vehicle in the same way the Vatican Bank or Scientologists have done that. The other thing I was going to say, if you really think about it, on the planet there's only two thousandths of Bitcoin per person, which is 0.002. It's particularly nothing, less than $100 per person if you work it out. So it takes on average about $2,000 to get to 27 grams of gold to have the same equivalent. So it's actually quicker to corner, essentially, I'm not a financial advisor, my own personal opinion, but if you were to compare it to gold, it's actually quicker to have the equivalent property stake by about 20 times. So yeah, that's one of my points. And my last point would be, actually, I'm going to leave it there. I don't want to take anyone else's time. There's a lot of hands, but I'll leave it with that.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. So, that's one of the trends. So Bitcoin's approaching, it's been $1 trillion market cap before, but it had the correction. And it's, around about 800 billion right now, approaching $1 trillion. Gold is about a $12 trillion market cap. When the ETF launched, which it recently launched, there was about 11 of them that were launched. And it took 2 days to become the second largest ETF commodity in the world. That took gold 21 years to achieve. Bitcoin achieved in 2 days. And it's now the second largest ETF commodity in the world. And that shows the kind of the TradFi. The great thing about Bitcoin is it was the first asset class I've ever experienced that allowed the schmuck and the coder and the retail person to front run Wall Street, because Wall Street mocked us the whole time, and it was the retail that were in first, and then suddenly you had companies doing it. I tried to do get several countries. I had a meeting with Boris Johnson, gave him a whole Bitcoin strategy. For those not from the UK, he was like our shamed prime minister. But when he was mayor of London, I was invited to give the whole Bitcoin strategy to him. And, this was 2013. He completely rejected it, laughed me out of the room. And then I remember I went to an island called the Isle of Man.
Wait, I can
Um,
tell you why, though. I can tell you why. So the reason why he laughed you out the room was because George Osborne, another Etonian, was on the Genesis block, and he really didn't like that.
oh, yeah.
No, so just so you know the connection,
And
people
sold
might
all
not get
Britain's
it.
gold as
But
well.
yeah, so they're part of the club, and they really did not like the fact that Bitcoin was created at all to this day. I remember my last point. Sorry to cut you off. My last point was gold, when it was confiscated, got revalued multiple times higher than what it was in the citizens' hands. If you're correct, which I believe you might be, not financial advice, but if there was an occasion where there was another confiscation of all hard assets, any physical or digital, they might try. After that event, the revaluation of that gold standard or whatever standard it would be, a crypto standard, is always higher. And then they use that as basically a leveraging strategy by basically creating credit on that new collateral, which has been basically created out of air, and made every person who doesn't hold it less wealthy, technically. And I think that's another mechanism for their Great Reset, essentially, to basically stabilize their control. So taking our property is always something I'm really worried about, and that's why your point about storing it in certain ways is as the real freedom to this, as Satoshi would say. I'll leave you with that.
Yeah, definitely. Being able to, and the fact is that it scales. You can store real value in Bitcoin, and it's the same as storing $1 in Bitcoin. Try scaling, gold at your own house. Uh, you know, that's it doesn't quite scale in the same way, and it's very hard to transport, and so and it's more scarce. And by the way, I'm a fan of gold. Don't correct me if don't get me wrong. Like Bitcoin is an ultra higher risk version of gold. But to me, I see gold as a hedge against Bitcoin as opposed to anything else. And the time that the whole internet goes out or you can't get anything, I mean, the technology will evolve. But there's times when you want your gold, and as you get older in life, you want to take less risk, and so it's about preparing for different. That's the funny thing as well. So most people would listen to me and probably say, oh, I'm sure you put everything in Bitcoin. um, I actually, for 20 years, I learned the lesson of don't bet against the Fed. I never imagined how long the Fed could keep this Ponzi scheme going. And so I have a part of my portfolio that just is on the existing empire, because I don't know when that's going to end. That could happen. I think it will happen in my lifetime, but I thought it would have happened around 2008 as well. And it didn't. But then you have to prepare for a change in empire, and that's where gold is the most useful um, type. But then you've also got to prepare for the future, and a world of war, a world of peace, a world of bank bail-ins, a world of bank bailouts, is very conducive, unfortunately, to a world of hard money. And so many of the user cases that Bitcoin solves is it's kind of protecting yourself from different scenarios as you go deeper and deeper into this subject.
Absolutely. I mean, I have spaces where we discuss kind of all of the different, what makes us the human species different than any other species, our ability to believe in stories, right? And it's like what the bankers have done is kind of weaponize that in a way, because now, I mean, they're the best storytellers. Everybody in the world believes in money, but also everything that is kind of pitched in order to keep a majority of society struggling, and whatever that looks like, talking us into, changing this and that in the system, to now we find ourselves in the most exploited, bullshit Ponzi scheme fiat system. And it's like, could you imagine a world where that part didn't exist? I mean, think about crime. Most crime is usually based on, needing money or that deficit and not having enough, or, something along those lines. But like, kind of slowly removing that from the equation. And I mean, I don't know. I think it's the philosophical aspect of this and what it could mean for the world is really interesting. So let's go to
No, definitely,
Nasdaq.
mate. So I want to
Yeah.
comment on that as well. Wealth inequality is a function of fractional reserve banking, no doubt about it. The fractional reserve banking system rewards those that are closest to the cheapest form of debt. And so those that have access to the cheapest form of debt at its extreme is someone that has access to a central bank. Think of those that own public companies. They can borrow against their stock, they can leverage debt, and they can buy back their stock and increase their wealth. Those that own a bank and have a banking license can borrow from the central bank, and then they can lend out at the higher interest rate. Put those on their extreme. Remember, we talked about interest rates. It bankrupts those that are in debt on the edge, and it enriches those that use debt in order to acquire assets. At its extreme, every single country that operates off a fiat currency system, which is all of them, ends up with extreme wealth inequality. Wealth inequality makes you believe that the right people, the people on the right feel like, hey, I don't want to pay my taxes. I feel scared. Everyone thinks that I'm part of the system. The people on the left feel completely shafted by the system, and you always have this extreme left and right type of extremism. Essentially, it becomes where which I think it's hit that point with the whole Biden Trump type of believing that these extremes on the left and the right are the solution to the problem, when the reality is that, I mean, nothing changes. There is no such thing as right conservative. Do you know what would happen if if Trump came along right now and said, I'm gonna commit to taking lots of oil out of the ground and paying off the national debt? The whole of America would go into a die-hard depression if you tried to pay off any of your debt. Because when you pay off debt, money gets destroyed. When you shrink the money supply, Volcker tried to do that in America. And Volcker was completely ejected from the system for trying to return it back to free market. It ends in crony capitalism, and there is no politician, nobody that can have all of the capitalist ideals, free market ideals, that can reverse that system. It's why under Trump, there was significantly more debt. And now under Biden, there is significantly more debt. Nobody can break the system. It is completely systemic. And the results, whatever politician you put there. But in the meantime, wealth inequality makes us all hate each other. And we think that if we got on the wrong side of the system, that was the fault of the person that got on the right side of the system. And that is built into fiat currency. When you have too much,
Exactly.
when you have debt that's greater than the amount of money in the world.
go. Exactly. You know what? I'm inspired. I'm going to do a space where we talk about this because if we broke this down, you just kind of added the political swing to it. And it's so true because there's those that are saying we need to be able to have more money for the poor people, this, that, whatever. I mean, like, if you, it's just so, it's so layered and it's so deep. I think that, you know, it's definitely worth exploring. Um, let's go to, oh wait, I don't know if it was Vincent. I think Vincent was next and then Naja. Sorry about that. And then we'll go to Joa. Hi, Joa.
How you doing? Thanks for having me. Great space. I just want to add a little comment, and I'm not sure if I have it right about what we just talked about with the debt. And I kind of have a theory that because of all the debt, and debt is outsourced to us, I believe that's why the U.S. is just opening the border and busting them in because they need more people to outsource that debt to. So I don't know if that's a theory or reality, but I'll get on to my.
Vincent, your
I got two
audio is
questions.
going in and out really bad. I don't know if you have something in front of the microphone, but just letting you know.
Any better? Well,
Yeah,
let's see.
seems like it. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
All right. So the first question is kind of tags on to what V was talking about earlier, and even what Simon was saying here about you don't spend Bitcoin, you save it. So Bitcoin to me is the gold standard, which I think to many of us it is. But V was talking about tokenized assets, which is kind of where I'm at as the spending mechanism. And let's say I start a company and tokenize that asset in a decentralized chain, and I take Simon on as a partner and he gets 30%. And with that 30%, he outsources his tokens, 20% of that to somebody else, and we start spending that as the economy. I believe that's how we get out of this fiat mess and we start to really take control of a free market again. Because if you're investing in Bitcoin not to spend but to gain more fiat, and then fiat collapses, where are we? We're in a mess with Bitcoin that we have to transact, and there's not enough for everybody to have. And so the question is, where do you stand on that type? I know you mentioned some tokenized assets before, and you didn't seem too keen on it, but I'd like to hear where you stand on that. And the second quick question is,
Let me take that
Napster.
one and then ask the second one.
Okay.
So I guess like when sometimes the oldest people to the space are the most skeptical. And so I'm one of those people that have seen everything, heard every pitch, invested in everything in the industry. I'm just talking about my niche, and been scammed so many times that you kind of become like an old goat where you kind of seen everything as a Bitcoin OG, and then you realize that actually out of it all, Bitcoin was the thing that made it. But that doesn't mean something else is not going to come along and change the world. And sometimes, you know, someone that's kind of old and scarred like me, I can add a bit of my advice, but then sometimes it's someone else comes along and they're not scarred like me, and they see things that I'm my skepticism doesn't quite see, and so I really appreciate it. So recently there was like a whole thing of build ordinals and building NFTs on Bitcoin and stuff. And so the skeptic in me, the goat that's seen all of that stuff, says, "Oh yeah, here we go again." But at the same time, it requires other people that are not scarred by all that to come along and create something. And so I always try and challenge myself in that way. So you know, tokenization. I still believe that, you know, if you think about what Austrian economics versus Keynesian economics is increased debt in order to stimulate an economy. And you have this debt-based system whereby as long as you take on enough debt, you can debase and borrow against your future. Whereas Austrian economics is the concept of having hard money, introducing savings into the economy. And when people can save, it turns out that they like to invest and they like to do things based upon a place of abundance rather than a place of scarcity. And so introducing like savings in. Now, once you've got your savings, you get very skeptical about spending your Bitcoin because you suddenly say, well, do you remember Bitcoin Pizza? Everyone knows the Bitcoin Pizza guy story. You know, he persuaded the very first one to persuade an outlet of Papa John's to accept 10,000 Bitcoin for 2 pizzas. That's a $420 million 2 pizzas. And everyone's been a Bitcoin. I used to go to conferences in 2011, 2012, 2013. And I'd go to the conference and I'd say, anyone that opens up a Bitcoin wallet, I'll send you some Bitcoin now. And I can't tell you how much Bitcoin I gave away in those days. And you look back at it and think about, wow, that's when you really realize, like, yeah, you need to be a little bit, you need to understand which money you spend and which one you save. And everyone goes through that types of journey. So being able to collateralize your wealth is a different type of debt than fiat debt. Debt based upon trust versus debt backed by wealth. And so then you go into the whole tokenization, and then you think about, well, the whole fraud of fiat currency was that it was creating, new money, and it was creating more debt than exists. But what if you could put all that on a blockchain and these different types of products, and everyone's innovating around that sector? So there's so much more to go. And I definitely want to be able to use my Bitcoin in smarter ways by people creating these new programmatic financial products. But this is what went wrong when you get too debt based. Like, I think ancient scriptures in religion understood this stuff. That whenever you put riba, whenever you put interest into the system, you get this force that oppresses and creates wealth inequality. Because I believe in like Islamic finance, where you have to invest in each other and you lose together. These are better financial products than somebody not being able to afford to repay the debt, and then you win anyway because you can confiscate their wealth and stuff. So, but all of this, we will go through the same cycles time and time again, because at the end of the day, the technology changes, but the humans don't, and we need to learn through experience. And so, learning through SBF scamming people, and recreating the banking system on top of Bitcoin, and creating these centralized databases and committing fraud. There was a lot to learn there, and you end up back at decentralization in the end, and decentralization, and not being able, what Bitcoin created is the ability to not cheat the system. No matter how hard you try, you can't mine a block that's not verified by everybody. You can't verify transactions that's not verified by everyone else. You can't come up with a new way of doing stuff. And that's what it was. It's trustlessness. And that comes to every single financial product in the world. Definitely.
It's so interesting because the word trust was what came up in the. You just kind of gave me a whole new flavor of it. But they did use that word quite a bit. I can't wait to go back and read. But they were talking about how you can trust this versus all the trust that comes with a traditional bank. They were highlighting that about CBDCs, and then they were trying to show that stable coins are not. It was, but so I was kind of thinking about it in quite the literal way. But you just kind of added a little more texture to it, so I appreciate that. Okay, so Naja, we'll
Can I
go to.
just add a little follow up to this?
Oh, sure, go ahead.
Yeah, we're in another tech bubble, just like the internet bubble, and so the new giants are going to emerge out of this. And if they started by tokenizing the companies, and again, the atomic swaps is what it's known as, when you could peer-to-peer exchange, stocks as tokens. Bitcoin and blockchain is a revolution in the exchange of value, and fiat only. We already learned this. Fiat only finances wars, and I don't want to be part of that game. So anyway, the new companies emerging out of this, tokenized and peer-to-peer exchange, I believe is where tokenomics is going. And Monday morning, I'm doing a space on that. But the quick follow-up question is, Napster, iTunes was the making a Napster official, or a real world product. I have a product that makes Silk Roads real world. I see you're an angel investor, Simon. How can I pitch you?
All right. Okay. Yeah. Well, you can send. So I don't want to pitch my company, but you can make an application on. If you look at my profile, you can see my company and you can apply for. But
Pitch,
I'm not here
pitch
to
your
pitch my
company.
company. So
This is about you. You gave us your time. You gave us all of your wealth of knowledge that is, you've accrued over, a very long amount of time. It's wisdom. People can't even buy in a book what you've expressed and shared with the stories. So please, by all means, pitch it.
all right, no, if you can apply on banktothefuture.com. There's a section called apply for finance, and one of our team will
Hey Maze,
look at
I'm
it.
on a break at work. Is it all right if I ask Simon a quick question?
Oh, you're on a break at
Yeah,
work?
just a quick one.
Sure.
All
Go
right, we're
ahead.
talking
If you
about
can make it super quick.
digital currency, right? And we all know that the sun could spit a solar flare so powerful at us that it could wipe out all electronics. What is your take on that? Like, say electronics go down, then all of our currency is digitally based. What will we do then?
It's an excellent question. It comes up a lot, and I can't wait to hear your answer. And I have one too behind it.
Let me make sure I fully understood it. Is it when if we enter a world where there is no like internet and stuff? Is that the
Well,
question? Or
Correct.
he said
Well,
if a solar EMP comes and it hits, and it basically will fry anything that's electronic. In that instant, what would one do about Bitcoin, and if that's where all their money is?
that's when you want your gold.
right?
That's why gold fulfills. Bitcoin doesn't solve everything, and gold is for that Armageddon scenario where the technology has not developed enough to be able to sustain. There's certain existential threats, and that's why Bitcoin's more of a speculative store of value than a store of value, because once the whole world knows it's a store of value, it will operate like gold. But at the moment, there are these existential threats. So you've got you've got quantum coming through, quantum cryptography. That would require, in order to make a quantum resistant cryptography, that would require taking everybody that's invested in Bitcoin mining equipment and making their equipment worthless. That's an existential threat. But if we're in that part of the world, that breaks the internet, that breaks banking, that breaks everything. So, we're kind of in bigger problems with these
Yeah,
with
yeah,
these
much
things as
larger
well.
Simon,
problems.
can I add to that real quick?
Yeah, go for it.
If that happens, the potatoes you have at home are going to be easier to trade than the dollar or anything, or gold or diamonds or anything else, because they're going to have more value than any currency you have. So if that happens, don't worry about currency at all. Worry about
So
getting
like
food.
barter, basically.
So I have a question actually about that. So let's just say, so I've covered, kind of the idea if that were to happen, how electronics would be fried. But they estimate that it would take anywhere between 10 months and a year to have some sort of kind of system back in place that's functional for people. And so in that case, does it still fry all the information? Like, would you be able to pick back up after everything's back, or does it break the chain in any way? How does that work? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so the record of the Bitcoin blockchain exists on every single node and computer that is mining that. So the miners are verifying all the transactions, and then a copy of that is stored. And then, so if you wanted to, for example, there was always this thing called, the reason other cryptocurrencies that tried proof of work failed is because there's always this concept of a 51% attack, which is that if you can gain control of 51% of the computing power, then in theory you could execute what's known as a double spend, where you change the record, just like a bank could, and delete someone's money, as it were. But you have to get 51%, you have to control 51% of the network. And that's always been a thing with Bitcoin, but it's always been theoretical. But when you have these centralized that never got the network effect that Bitcoin got, it becomes a real thing. And all of those copies of Bitcoin, like Bitcoin SV and Bitcoin Cash, they've had these issues, and they were just simply people trying to create carbon copies, but it didn't have the security behind it and everything. So all of those copies exist on all of that hardware and nodes. And Blockstream was a company that put a node up in the satellite. and the innovation is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So now that you've got it where our industry is actually, I think people are using Bitcoin mining as a way of increasing efficiency in grids and electric systems. And one of the things I'm involved in right now is a new mining company that's set to go public, and the amount of innovation that's happening in the mining sector. But yeah, if you can if you can go to every single country that is mining Bitcoin, and you can bomb and take out 50% of all the different hardware, and you can find a way of deleting all the records from all these different computers in the largest, most decentralized network where you don't know where they geographically are. And that's what makes Bitcoin different. Bitcoin's got the highest level of, it would cost a state actor, like $3 billion in order to try and gain control. And they would have to figure out $3 billion every minute. And they would have to try and figure out how to get all those physical locations and blow up over 50% of them at the same time. It's completely infeasible and impossible for that to happen right now. But then, yeah, if you've got a meteorite or whatever you're referring to, a bit more scientific, you said it, and it takes out all of these different concepts, then these are things we have to worry about a lot more than just Bitcoin, I guess.
Yep. Thank you for that, Simon. And thanks for the question. Naja, thanks for also being patient and letting him go. Your turn. Jump in.
Hey, thanks. Longtime follower. Simon said a quick question. I've heard you in previous talks and spaces about CBDCs and stuff. And one thing I didn't understand our concept is, one of the ways you have to deleverage the fiat system is CBDCs provide a mechanism to deleverage the fiat system. And the fiat system is a debt-based system, but when CBDCs are created, it's not created out of debt. I've heard you've made that comment before, and that just didn't. Sorry about that.
Got you.
I didn't understand when you said that.
Yeah. So how crazy is it? Yeah, this is just an interesting concept, right? If you were to design a monetary system from scratch, and you were just to think about the design of it right now, would you have come up with the concept that every time the issuance of the new currency is directly correlated to the people that are willing to borrow it into existence, and then these issuers are able to create, you have to pay back more money than exists, and therefore all money needs to be backed by debt. People think that you can't issue currency without backing it by debt just because that's the way that those that control the financial system engineered the system, by taking control of all of the legislative, the laws, and over time as we transition to the system. So right now we have the most complicated financial system the world could ever imagine, where we can't even say what is the money supply really. Well, you've got this M thing, you've got cash and coins. How does that come into existence? All right, so there's this mint, and this mint prints a note, and it costs 3 cents in order to print a $10 note. So who makes that $9.97 profit? Well, you take the note and you give it to a bank and you sell it for $10, and they put it in their ATM, and then that $9.97 is transferred over to Treasury, and it reduces the amount of tax that one needs to pay. So you mean the government could create money rather than the private banks creating that money? And so the M supply, the cash and coins, is actually reduces the amount of tax one needs to pay. The next swap on the line is M1, which is the digital currency created at a bank backed by debt. And then you go further up, M2, M3, including money markets. And then you go into derivative markets. And then eventually you hit the shadow banking system, where you realize there's more of these debts in existence that's significantly larger than the entire output of the world productive economy and all commodities that exist in the world. And then it starts to blow the mind. And that's how the financial system works today. Now, what if there was just one money supply called M? And what if the government just said, well, we don't need to manipulate interest rates to control the amount of money that banks create and send people bankrupt and encourage them to take on debt and then send them bankrupt when we put the rates up so that we can cool down the economy? What if you just had money that was created as M? Well, that would be a lot easier. You could have a completely transparent money supply. You wouldn't need to manipulate the private banks and see how much they need to create. But what's the problem with that? Well, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So now you're in CBDC world. A CBDC could create completely debt-free money. Imagine we're in 2008 again and the banking system's about to go. BlackRock is implementing its Aladdin algorithm to figure out which banks to go bust and who's going to own who, and recommending to the Federal Reserve, getting the system lined up for how they want to do it. But what if the Fed then says, yeah, screw it, we'll let you all go bust, but no one's going to lose their money. We're going to give you that money as a CBDC. The money supply is going to be identical. We're not increasing the money supply, but it's no longer backed by debt. And all you've got to do is download this app. So we've got the same money supply in the world, but we've taken out the leverage. And then you sell off all the assets. They put it all on the banks, on the Federal Reserve's balance sheet, and you get a fiscal and monetary union. Holy shit, we're starting to look a little bit like communism now. Everyone has private rights, but all of the money's created. There you go. That's CBDC. So in order to save a debt-based Ponzi scheme, you could replace all the debt with a new debt-free currency. It would deleverage the system, but at the same time, you'd have to give up your freedoms and everything that makes your country what you think is great about your country, because you're given absolute control over. And that's where I think we're headed in the fiat currency world. That's what I think the future of banking is. I think the central banks turn on the banks and the governments take complete control of the fiat currency system. That's where I think it goes in the end.
Absolutely. And also the factor, like people that are buying, assets and all of that, kind of hoping to dodge, I guess, whatever that looks like, whatever, because the idea of own nothing and be happy, it was interesting. Then when they published the Bank of International Settlements, the future monetary system, it talks about how even assets and everything become tokenized and put into the unified ledger and still have parameters around it, obviously for the execution of smart contracts. But I think that there's going to be, and this is something I have yet to validate, so I'm going to just put that out there. I'm going to do it now that I reminded myself it's a to-do. But there's going to be like a devaluing of everything per se. So like there would be a certain amount of that debt that's recovered or just wiped away with the new money that they're creating. But then there's going to also be a reassessment of whatever it is owned. And there's some sort of, I have to go look into it, but I don't know if anybody's familiar with that and you want to come up and speak to it, that'd be great. But so yeah, excellent questions. And also, Joshua, just real quick, if that were to happen, you'd still be in the same boat today because everything is digital most of the time. I mean, some people keep money, but we would still be in that same boat. So whatever you would do in that situation, you would do with Bitcoin too. Go ahead, Lily. Did you want to chime in real quick
Yeah,
before I go to
if
Yeah,
Charles?
just real
everyone
quick,
if
I was
everyone
just
looks
gonna say,
quickly.
as I know some
Oh,
people that they have things wrapped in Faraday material or like keep some, like there are people that actually in Bitcoin that think about that and have taken steps. So, there's that to think about as well.
Well, I just wanna say one thing quick. What I meant to say is like, say everybody invests in Bitcoin, and then that happens, like they won't get compensated for it, is what I meant. Like I know that it comes down to like what you can do, like growing potatoes or trading something that you do for something that someone else has, but like, because Maze was saying like that it'd take like 10 months to bring everything back up to get that electrical spark we need to get electronics running and that. But would there be like a way of tracking what you have in Bitcoin so that you could get reinvested or reimbursed, my bad.
So I think Lily just brought up a good point. So there's a lot of people that are creating Faraday cage kind of to be able to protect their cold storage. So there's consideration for that already. I don't know, Simon, if you wanted to add to that.
Oh yeah, I mean, as you start to look, the first step is to have a bit of Bitcoin and experience what it's like to own your own money. You might just leave it at an exchange initially, and then you buy a hardware wallet. And then once you get a hardware wallet, you learn how to set that up. And then you ask different questions that go along. And then you start to ask yourself, well, what if this wallet gets lost? So then you create a backup. And then you're like, well, what if someone gets the backup? And then you're like, well, I store that in a safety deposit box at a bank, maybe, or a custodian, or I come up with another thing. And then you're like, well, what if that goes on fire? And then you say, well, what if there's a flood? And you just work through these different things as your value increases. That's a good problem to have. If your value is increasing and you're figuring out how to protect your wealth, then you're on the right path. And if you're trying to think about, well, what about all these other different existential threats? As the value increases, you start to think about how to protect. Then you start thinking about, well, what if I die? How do I do inheritance? And then you're like, well, how do I give a piece of and you start going through all these different things. And so many people, one of the tragedies of Bitcoin is that so many people um, are in a position where they won't entrust anyone with being able to execute their inheritance. So the supply is only going to contract because so many people, unfortunately, will pass away with never passing on their Bitcoin. And there's so many, I mean, I'd say probably 4 to 5 million of the Bitcoin that exists today is probably unretrievable, that can never be retrieved again. And so the only way for people to get more Bitcoin, because it's divisible by 8 decimal places, is for people to be willing to pay more for a Bitcoin. And they just become rarer and rarer and rarer. And that's what makes hard money. That's what makes hard money with gold. The higher the price go, the more people are incentivized to spend more in order to dig more out of the ground. And although it's, the amazing innovation of gold is that it only increased an average of 2% per year, even though you have those dynamics. But Bitcoin shrinks when people are losing their Bitcoin. And as the value goes up, because it's divisible by more and more decimal places, it doesn't shrink the size of the economic value as it goes up. So it was an incredible design.
But for this very reason, Simon, and you've mentioned a bit earlier about the fact that like today's world with the M1, M2, why don't have just one M? The challenge there and the trouble is even today is that economies and markets grow and shrink. You could say that obviously that's because of how the system functions today and it's inefficient in some sense, and it's obviously all these crises that have become a bit more often. But um, you see, this is why tokenization will actually happen. Okay, they could be CBDCs, for example, but the tokenization that I'm talking about, it could be commodities, it could be actual stocks or securities or a lot of other, good things that we still have in this financial system. And by the way, just to respond to one of the speakers a bit earlier, because he's asked you about what you think about tokenization. I know that in the past year and a half, this tokenization has already started in Asia. It's quite heavily deployed. And I've spoken to some people within the financial system within Europe. That's already started a year ago, also in the West.
Yeah. So I'll give some use cases. So I invested in when they were a lot smaller, Coinbase, Ripple Labs, Circle, Robinhood, and Robinhood and Coinbase went public, and we had a few thousand investors that had invested through Bank to the Future that pulled up a part of a funding round, and then we had to deliver those shares to them once the company went public. It took us 9 months in order to take delivery of the public shares versus the private shares. because we had to literally go get, because we were in a non-US country, taking delivery of a NASDAQ listed stock in an offshore jurisdiction with investors from multiple countries all around the world. We had to actually we had to get like this thing called a physical guarantee medallion bank thing to prove this. And then we had to send it over to Cayman Islands, and then it had to be a physical wet signature. And then it had to come back over here. And then we had to get it there. And then there was a mistake, and we had to go around the whole process 3 times. And each time there was someone taking their cut. And there was about 9 different types of brokers and transfer agents and custodians and everything in the middle. And it took us 9 months to just get people their damn stock. Then we invested in a company called Exodus, and Exodus actually decided to go public on a blockchain. So they got it all regulatory approved. They issued the tokens, and it was done. It was just transferred to everybody. They were able to hold it in their Exodus wallet, and it was a significant improvement. Now, imagine right now you have capital controls, and so a country like US has the best capital market in the world. But what if you could actually take your New York Stock Exchange stock and send it to the Tokyo Stock Exchange really easily? Or you could send it to the Shanghai Stock Exchange. And what if you had this interoperability between these different stock markets? These are the questions we've been trying to solve for a while. In fact, in 2016, there was a company that I became a shareholder in called Bitfinex. And Bitfinex got hacked for 119,000 Bitcoin that were then valued at 72 million. The company was insolvent. And what we did is we created a token that represented $1 of debt that the company Bitfinex would agree to repay. And so everyone had this token. There were 72 million tokens. And there were a bunch. So everyone was issued these tokens. Now, immediately, everyone was like, Bitfinex, are they ever going to be able to pay that $72 million back? So a bunch of the token went out and started trading. And everyone that wanted to sell crashed the price down to about 30 cents. People started selling at 30 cents, 40 cents. People had different things. But then Bitfinex managed to get up and running again, and they started to make profit, and they started to pay down some of that debt. And every time they started paying down some of that debt, the token value went up. And then we allowed people to convert that token that they bought at 30 cents into $1 worth of shares in the company. And then about 55 million of it converted into shares. And we were able to get it from Bitfinex over to Bank to the Future through this tokenization mechanism, pay down the debt, which was correlated to the profits of the company. And Bitfinex, those shares eventually traded from 30 cents to $16, paid out hundreds of millions of dollars in dividends from all future profits. And the coins were eventually found by the Department of Justice, and they were entitled to a part of those programmatically through this token. That was the most successful bankruptcy case in history that I know about. It was one of my most successful investments. And that was all because of the possibilities of tokenization relative to some of these. So where I think tokenization becomes really interesting is not doing what the legacy system already does, is doing things that could never have been done before. And that's where there's an amazing, buoyant entrepreneurial culture that is completely global, non-geographical base of anyone that wants to invest time in putting together a team to fire up codes. But at the same time, there's a lot of scammers out there, and that's kind of the free market that we experience ours in. And 99% of it ends up a bunch of scammers or honest things that end up bad. And then someone's going to just take something that really, really disrupts the status quo in a really big way. And so that's the beauty of it. That's just the way it works.
Sure.
That's
And
called markets.
I perfectly understand it, but the use cases that you've just presented, and I'm well aware of all of them, but I've actually, patiently waited because maybe others didn't know about them. These are the use cases that I'm talking about. And the reason for why a lot of the debt exists in the system today is because you cannot literally physically trade. And you've explained how long it takes because you literally had to go and get pieces of paper And this is what a lot of people don't even know. Even today, when you go and trade a share or a security on an exchange, someone in the background somewhere needs to go and print a piece of paper, which is crazy. I mean, I find it absolutely hilarious. Like, why the hell do you have to still do this? So these are the examples that I'm actually thinking about of having tokenizations and be able to exchange the value, whatever that value is, in order to be able to have the economy moving. And that's where the need for these, tokens or tokenizations of value are needed. Yeah, because you know we can accept that, for example, in a scenario where Bitcoin is the answer for all of it all, transacting that, and you said it yourself, you want to have that as a saving, yeah, or a store of value sort of reference, but you don't want to spend it, yeah. But you'll need those other instruments in order to be spending. And I don't think CBDCs will be the answer here. And that's what I'm trying to say with tokenization.
Yeah,
Uh,
hopefully CBDCs let you compete with stablecoins, and stablecoins can be competed by different issuers, and social networks can create them, and Twitter can create them, and your bank can create them, and we end up in this network of people be able to, hold their value in line with their ideology, and I
Sure,
think
sure,
that's where it
but
goes.
yeah, but ultimately, you're not going to have this huge dead bubble in the system that literally someone trades with, isn't it? Because that's exactly what's happening today. So when you're going to be able to literally, have all your transaction finalized, you're not going to build debt in the system just because your system is slow to transact. And that's the whole idea of it.
Well, debt's built into a system for one to oppress from the other,
Correct. Yeah.
unless it's collateral backed. And so that's what history has always said, that someone will try and do that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, V. Joa, thank you for being patient. And guys, I know just to be conscious of time and the time difference between where I am and where Simon is, I'll take these final questions and then we will wrap it up. Go ahead, Joa.
Yeah, I recently had a conversation with a friend, and I was saying I don't think the US dollar or fiat currency has much left in it. And he's like, okay, please explain it to me like a 5-year-old. And I think the example, the analogy I gave him really made it clear that it doesn't. And I think a lot of people listening probably think, oh, the dollar's going to be around. I'm not that worried. But think of it this way. It's basically, it has two problems. One has to do with fiat and the other one doesn't. One is just a capitalistic system. I go around the monopoly board, I won the game. My kid, the next generation, starts with an advantage over the competition's new kid, right? So he has to start out with lower amount of cash than I have, and this keeps compounding generation after generation, um, because I'm allowed to pass on what I've accumulated. He goes to a better school. Like, for example, I went to University of Pennsylvania. My children have a 40% acceptance rate versus the other person who didn't go there who has a 3% acceptance rate. So there's a ton of advantages there, but that doesn't have anything to do with fiat. Okay. But as you win, you accumulate more assets, and your kids will accumulate more assets. And that typically happens. But then what happens is when you print money, you increase the price of assets. The hamburger, the bread, the eggs, the homes, the stocks, the gold, they go up, right? And since fiat has been introduced, that $200 first place in Monopoly, which used to cost $200, today would cost 7,000, right? And that's due to money printing and increasing inflation. And if you go search out inflation adjusted home prices, homes have not increased in value outside of inflation since the 70s. Inflation and home prices are 100% correlated since the 70s. It's insane. So you see how the system kind of is rigged against you. So if you keep going down this path, and the next generation, this generation is already going to have a hard time buying homes. The next generation, that $7,000 starter home in the Monopoly game, will probably be closer to 12, right? and this keeps compounding. So you could see how eventually the winner of the game takes all the money, and people starting fresh because they didn't get inheritance and everything else are going to be at an extreme disadvantage where you will have civil unrest and you will have everything else. And fiat cannot survive like this. So besides the whole how much debt United States is in, it is already a rigged game to begin with. And I think the chart that shows it the best is home prices have not changed prices except for the fact of inflation. And that's why you've really only left with three options. You have something like the Swiss franc, which has the Swiss actually bought stocks and assets against it after the Swiss franc failed, and it's performed extremely well. Problem is, it's still governmentally controlled, but it's easy to spend. Then you have gold, great store of value, but it's not like fiat. It's not like the Swiss franc because you can't spend it easily. And then you have Bitcoin, which is kind of the best of both worlds. Easy to spend, no governmental control. So it really only leaves me that option as what can substitute current fiat currencies, and that's really the only one I see. And I don't know if you see anything else, Simon, but I mean, maybe you don't since you're so heavily invested in Bitcoin. But when you put all these factors in, we have another generation or two before this is completely out of control. And that's not even bringing in the debt and everything else. It's simply the fact that they need to print money. That's the way fiat works. And every time they do, things get more expensive. So every next generation that needs to start over, that's not getting some big inheritance, is at a complete disadvantage from everyone else. And that's going to create an uprising. So my question, Simon, is there anything else besides the three I mentioned, franc, gold, and Bitcoin? I don't see anything that kind of has the advantages of Bitcoin.
Yeah, so you've obviously got gold and Bitcoin. They go hand in hand, neutral money. And then you have fiat currencies, which I think always go in cycles. And every single fiat currency goes through the same cycle, ends in extreme wealth inequality that then creates a revolution, a civil war. And then when you have those, you have an external force that comes along and takes advantage of that weakness. And then everyone decides who's going to blow each other up. And then you sit round in a table and realize that the people that survived had hard money, Bitcoin and gold. And then they redesigned the financial system based upon whoever won on the proof of weapons network and managed to not have their country destroyed. And I think the next country that would do that is China. And so that's the cycle. And
And Simon,
yeah.
what saved us? If you remember '87, same thing happened. Huge crash, printed money, went to war. Everyone was talking about the end of the U.S. and then the financial system. But then the internet came, so efficiency increased, and America was saved. Then you have 2008, huge crash, printed money, went to war. Um, and then we had another thing which allowed us to print more money because in 2017 everyone was talking about, hey, looks like we're going to have a huge crash. But then we had COVID, which allowed us to print more money than ever before and somehow retain the confidence from around the world that, hey, the dollar is the only safe place to go. But outside that event, I think we would have had a big crash before. So I don't know what will save it the next time this happens, to be honest.
And also, it doesn't have to be so gruesome. The fall of the British Empire was it was quite a soft blow. You know, it was an ego thing, and it was recognizing that there's a new empire, and two allies decided to go side by side, and Britain became someone that just follows everything that America does, and the British pound still exists. So it's not always as gruesome and violent, but we did have World War One and World War Two in the middle. And that was pretty destructive. And if you look at the types of events that the Brits did when they came towards the end of the empire, we had the Balfour Declaration. Look what that did. That brings us to where we are right now. You know, when our colonialism became unprofitable, and you know, it's we've still got lots of hangovers from those world wars that were not quite resolved.
Thank you, Joa. I believe DJ Satoshi and then Lumi.
Yeah, so I'll try to be quick. I think Bitcoin is inevitable, and the
Uh-oh,
beauty
can you
of
guys
it.
hear him?
Yeah,
I
can
can,
you?
yeah.
Okay, I'll drop down. Maze, can you bring me back up?
Maisie's going to drop down. Can you bring him back up?
Yep, absolutely. I was like, I want to hear too, but I didn't want to disrupt.
Should we take another one while that's happening, or should we wait? Is that
He's already back up. You want to
okay?
do an
Cool.
audio check, Vijay?
Twitter is just glitching. Anyway, I was just saying that the beauty, and I think why Simon is just so even keel and just so like chill and relaxed, right, is because he understands Bitcoin so well. And I'm pretty chill too. Like, and I don't think I understand it maybe necessarily that well, but I'm learning. And I think that's the key. And I think that that's really the only message I want to share with everyone listening, especially if you're new to Bitcoin. Just study it. You know, I'm not even going to tell you to like buy any. I'm just going to say study it, because as I study it more and as I listen to people like Simon and others who understand Bitcoin on a very deep and like, you know, smart level, maybe smarter than me, they're all just really calm and they see what's coming and they understand that Bitcoin's going to win. We've never had a system like Bitcoin. We've never had a freedom money like Bitcoin that's not controlled by rulers, by people, but it's controlled by code. So there's rules, but no rulers. And so even though these CBDCs are coming and even though they're going to do all these things and try to enslave us further into their monetary systems, Bitcoin is an opt-in system. It's not forcing you to use it. It's one that if you understand it and you learn about it, you're going to want it because you want freedom and it's just nature. So anybody who's ever tested gravity knows that they fail and they usually die. So it's kind of the same thing with like CBDCs, right? Like they're going to fail. They're going to keep enslaving people. They're going to keep tricking people. Crypto's going to keep enslaving people, tricking people, scamming people, but they all fail eventually. So I'm pretty chill about it. And I just, one thing that Simon, you said tonight, which I really was interested in hearing more, if you want to elaborate on, how do you think it's going to play out? That like, do you think it's going to be just like 100 million people, then like a billion people, and then 2 billion people using Bitcoin? And there's just going to be parallel economies where people who are, you know, preferring to use Bitcoin and transact freely amongst each other around the world, they're just going to have their own economies underground? Or do you think it's just going to be that more and more people are just going to move away of like enslaved countries, whether that does become China or the US or wherever that does enact a CBDC? How do you think that's all going to play out?
Yeah, I would love to say that Bitcoin's going to be the great equalizer and everyone will buy Bitcoin and everyone will grow their wealth together. But history has shown that it never quite works out that way. And so it's kind of, it is I love a game of abundance, but Bitcoin is a game of scarcity and you want scarcity in money. And so, you know, it is kind of a race for the countries that want those Bitcoins, the companies that want those Bitcoins, the ETFs that want those Bitcoins, the individuals that want those Bitcoins. And every year and every cycle, if you get, by the way, Bitcoin's a 4-year cycle, in case you didn't know that. It's designed as a 4-year cycle and it's always followed that trend because every 4 years, the number of Bitcoins that get created for all the miners that are verifying all the transactions, it cuts in half. And so you've got all these kind of cycles that happen. So the first cycle in Bitcoin, the first 4-year cycle was all about, can we create something decentralized? So Satoshi mined 1 million Bitcoins. He's never moved them, or they've never moved them, or she's never moved them. We still don't know. And it was all about, can you persuade other people to mine? Can we create this decentralized network? And that was really just about the first cycle, and it worked. The second cycle was all about surviving regulators that wanted to shut everything down and then you had China ban, you had a US ban, you had Silk Road shut down. But every time it got through it, and that was like the second 4-year cycle. The third 4-year cycle is when everyone started trying to create their own Bitcoins. And everyone started saying, well, what if I could fork off Bitcoin and create my own Bitcoin called Bitcoin Cash? And by the way, this is the real Bitcoin. And there's no longer 21 million Bitcoins. There's now 42 million Bitcoins. And it turned out that you can't do that because everyone still valued Bitcoin and saw the other thing as something that doesn't work, that no one valued. And so it had to survive money printing. This cycle was actually about surviving. The whole of Bitcoin's history was a quantitative tightening. So we were created out of the financial crisis. Sorry, not quantitative tightening, the opposite, quantitative easing. And so we had low interest rate environment. We had quantitative easing. And so there was easy dollars throughout the whole history of Bitcoin. This cycle was about, well, what happens when there's inflation and quantitative tightening? Can we survive that? Yep, boom, survive that one. We had a massive bunch of exchanges, fraud, all sorts of stuff, survive that one. The next cycle, I think, is about surviving central bank digital currencies. And everyone will be like, oh, do I use Bitcoin or CBDCs? And everyone learns the difference and everyone realizes, holy shit, that one survived and the cycle still prevails. Why? If you price anything, take any asset class in the world, real estate, gold, dollars, anything, and price it in Bitcoin, you see the same chart. The same chart where everything fails relative to Bitcoin. So the biggest problem that people have is they price things in fiat currencies. They price their wealth in fiat currencies. This was the game changer for me. I stopped valuing my wealth in pounds and I started valuing my wealth in Bitcoin. And when I valued my wealth in Bitcoin, I realized all I've got to do is earn some money this month and buy some Bitcoin. I'm not talking about all my money. I'm talking about 10% of it. Or sometimes it was less because I just couldn't afford it, or I had to pay down some debt. But all I need to have is more Bitcoin this month than I had the previous month. And every time I priced anything in Bitcoin, when the price was crashing, every time I earned some fiat currency, I could buy more Bitcoin. When the price is going up, you feel a wealth effect, like your fiat currency wealth is going up. And as long as you're trying to get more Bitcoin and you are willing to go through a 4-year cycle and not trade and not get distracted, and not get scared away by all the things that people are going to tell you when Bitcoin fails, then you'll know the next one is about surviving the CBDC cycle. After that is probably surviving the AI cycle. And I really don't think we get much more empires. I think the Chinese empire will be a short-lived empire, because I think we're going to figure out that technology can do things, and they're going to take away these powers from these crazy humans that seem to create these proof of weapons network and destroy each other and do crazy things to defend borders and forget that actually the fabric of society is the fact that we're all humans and we all need more love. We don't need anything else. And the fact that the reality is that governments are just in the way between us, and we put these labels on each other and we forget that we're all just humans and we were lucky to be bought in one place, or we had the right skin color that allowed for this opportunity, or we came from the right religion, when really the reality is that technology can tell us the truth eventually. AI is going to take away all these lies that governments have told us. AI is going to take away all these central banks that are oppressing and creating wealth inequality. And I may be completely deluded, but I still want to delude myself into believing that in the end of all this technology, that maybe in the end we have a better relationship with God, we have a better relationship with humans, and we have more love in the world. And I think that's something I'd like to spend the rest of my life trying to achieve.
Wow, that's so incredible, Simon. I actually, I agree with you. I feel like, humanity for a large part, the collective and our ability now to be able to collaborate and to share knowledge and our access to information, I think it was highly underestimated. Meaning, whether or not a technocracy was maybe the intention and planned, just underestimating the intelligence and the collaboration and the, desire for freedom in humans' hearts, I think is the biggest mistake they ever made. And I agree with you because a lot of times I have AI spaces and you have that polarity within the room and the different beliefs around it, how it's going to take us over, it's going to kill us all. And I'm just like, it doesn't have the volition. It just gives us more tools, right? So why would we allow a tyrannical kind of system to leverage the tool without, us leveraging it? So I love that you added that. That was epic. It was so well said. I did bring up Aaron as well. Lumi's next, and but then we'll have Aaron, be the last question that we ask. Go ahead, Lumi.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to be quite quick. Simon, I don't know, and everyone else in the room, if you know, obviously there's the halving event coming, but then there's also the halving block. So that's the block, the first one issued after the event. So there are, like you said, these big cycles and little cycles. And my personal opinion, I don't know, is that in the future these blocks are different. They might be considered more valuable than virtually every other one. And for instance, every 2 weeks on average, there's a difficulty block. So after the difficulty is readjusted, there's also a unique block in that sense. My point is that the original Genesis block is no one's going to be able to have it, but that has almost a little bit of graffiti in the sense of it, of what's written on it. The idea is that artists in the future, the ordinals, might decide, oh, I want a better piece of property to put my art on, in the sense that they want to distinguish themselves. And it's an idea I had recently where I was like, oh, this could be interesting. I might have to go through my wallet and work out if I have anything, and find the thing. But I was going to say, do you think that's a possibility, that some blocks might be valued more than other blocks? And the last thing I was going to say, because I don't like to ask too many questions at a point, I think Bitcoin is the equivalent of the dual bookkeeping system, which was invented by the pharaohs back then. So it's the next phase of everything, that blockchain essentially. And so that technology cannot be put back in the box one way or another. And that, I think, is the most annoying thing for the central banks. And one last point, I think Satoshi was Palestinian. Just make a little joke, but being serious, I really do think that.
Yeah, you know how to get my heart. The Palestinian cause is something that's deep and to both Maze and I, and Joa and everyone else, other people that have been on the stage as well. That's how we met. I think the pharaoh analogy is interesting, but I see the pharaoh as the previous oppressors, and Prophet Moses, peace be upon him, had to come along and free the people, and they were given a promise of land as long as they act in a certain way. And we had these messages from God, and these messages were changed, and we had the Bible, and then we had the Torah, and then we had the New Testament, the Old Testament, the Quran, and various other things that we've gone through. But the pharaohs were the oppressors. So I see fiat currency more as the analogy of the pharaohs. And I think what would be remarkable and a little bit of a pet project for me. So I spent a lot of, if you go to my Twitter profile, the pinned tweet was when I was working with the president of El Salvador. And El Salvador was the first country in the world to make Bitcoin legal tender. I tried to do it in Isle of Man in 2014, and the Isle of Man government actually agreed to it. They made Bitcoin legal tender. They started accepting tax in it, and the Bank of England, because they share, you have like a Manx pound. It's an island just off the UK, and you have a British pound. And the Bank of England contacted the Isle of Man and said, if you support this Bitcoin project, we're going to actually remove clearing to your island. So they used the oppression of the central bank digital currency, because essentially we had a digital version of the pound that we had to permission, which was backed by the monarchy. It's a crown dependency, this island. And so it's got all this historical context and history. And so the government said that it could be done, but the Bank of England said that we're going to oppress your system. And that actually was a failed project. All of the companies, Coinbase, all of them, we had them all over to the Isle of Man. They were all looking for an island to support them so that they could grow. And then the Bank of England got in the way of that one. But we had
I'm
another
pretty
crack
sure,
at it.
sorry to interrupt, but I'm pretty sure Jersey would never have let you in as well, because that's even more That yeah, no, there's no way. But
That's
no,
Banker Island, yeah.
yeah, right. But no, I don't want to distract from my first point though. I think the blocks. Do you think there'll be a different value between different blocks purely because of how rare they are, like and when they occurred? Like if you manage to have a halving block by chance, that might be worth more than just the regular value of the Bitcoin. Just wondering.
Maybe. I mean, I guess this is the whole ordinals thing. If you can find whatever you're inscribing to that block that makes it more valuable to one person, maybe. But I think the fungibility concept is a pretty important concept with the actual Bitcoin. But yeah, I guess this is the whole proposition of ordinals and inscriptions and being able to create value on top of. But yeah, I mean,
Well, I mean,
whether
my point is this: like in the UK, you've got like the little blue plaque. No one in the room might know that, but the blue plaque is like a historic building, essentially. A little bit of history happened here, and my thinking is that say we've all died, like, and our kids are now own our Bitcoin. At that point, it might be a history lesson. They might be like, "Oh, this was the halving block," or like, "This was." This and this, and it's because of like how things go backwards in time. When we might not be seeing it as history right now, but in maybe 50 years, it might be so substantial.
yeah, I don't quite know what you mean by owning a block, but yeah, owning the non-fungible fungible thing. But Bitcoin
I
will
mean,
always be.
I mean, for instance, so the first coin which is issued after the halving, right? It will be essentially the more, it's like it's like the event was the halving event. It's like a eclipse. Think of it like that. And then the first one after that, I would say would be kind of like rarer, and it's also unique because it was like the next one issued. But I don't know. It's a weird concept of value.
I've got you now. I'm getting it. So basically, inscribing something into a block. Yeah,
No inscribing. It's the all right. So it's the idea. For instance, if you could get access to Satoshi's wallet and own the first Genesis block, then you would own more property than just the Bitcoin
You
value.
can't own a
you,
block,
you
Lumi.
can't
You
own a block.
can't own a block. You know, you have to study something called UTXOs, okay, which are unspent transaction outputs, which is what every Bitcoin is. So just look up UTXO and how Bitcoins work.
Thank you.
Can I take a stab at it, Simon? Because I am in ordinals, but you did bring up coins. The first coin is not worth more by anyone than the last coin, unlike coins that are minted, which do have a value. That doesn't mean that won't change in the future, but I don't see why, because there's typically something you show off in the physical world. So I think the fact that I know what you're trying to get to is ordinals that were minted early, like the first 10,000 ordinals are worth more than the last 100,000 ordinals. It's true just because people got in them earlier, so you have more people in them. But that's because people are giving it more value, not because it was minted first. Um, we haven't seen that with tokens. I don't know if we'll see that with ordinals, although I do believe there is value in ordinals at the time.
Did you want to comment on that? So I think that, over time, what we've seen happen over the past 13 years and how it's kind of established itself, there was a lot of times where they ironed out the kinks and there, this is something that will continue to evolve, right? Like I think that there's going to be more creativity, more technology, more ways to use it, and it's just going to continue to build on itself. So I'm excited to see what that looks like. And we'll go to Aaron. Jump in, Aaron.
Hey, good evening. Thank you for letting me speak for just a second. You may have touched on this already, but one of the things that's happened since the Federal Reserve was created in the early 1900s, and then of course the British Bank, is money laundering, and we're seeing it now with Ukraine. How do you see the CBDC impacting that if the governments came out with something that was a little bit more articulate on spending? How could they money launder things easy like they do today? That's my question.
Just real quick though, like Aaron, because the founding of the modern FOMC, and if you look at Mariner Eccles, who is, he's the one that basically, like I said, just founded the modern FOMC. I think that sometimes it's easy because institutions evolve, but if you look at even the speeches he was giving, towards the end of his time, even representing the Fed, I think that maybe what you said isn't exactly accurate, right? And how some of the figures that have helped establish these things and done so with intentions of helping people, that some things sometimes happen with
Well,
institutions,
I
right?
just know
So,
the inflation rate right
yeah.
now. My dollar is worth a
Well, you were
whole lot
talking about the
less.
Fed.
Yeah.
I know, but
You were talking about the founding of the Fed. So I just wanted to like kind of clear that up. And I know you're trying to wrap up
Well,
the
the
space.
founding of the Fed happened right before World War One, and only the reason why World War One happened was because the Fed funded it. So just put it in context. But again, going back to my original question, when it comes to having something that has more articulate data when it comes to money laundering, how do you see a CBDC system come into play with that?
Yeah, well, that's the whole point of the CBDC, and the whole point of money laundering is to be able to define what your country or your ideology believes is classified as terrorism versus you enacting the same act but reframing it in a way where the vast majority of the world, through media manipulation, think that your act is not terrorism. And so a CBDC is going to be ideological currency that has complete command and control from the issuer, that can change the algorithm based upon the ideology of that central bank digital currency, which initially will be attached to state actors, but will probably in the end just be a bunch of anyone can issue these things. And so money laundering is the process of command and control in order to stop money that you believe to be tainted, and obviously that leads to political weaponization of the stopping causes and things like freedom of speech, because you can censor a WikiLeaks or some kind of service that is against the goal of the government, and then you have different layers of CBDCs that are more oppressive or more freedom orientated. The more freedom orientated comes with a side effect that if you can transact freely, then some people that early adopt technology is the ones that are also doing bad things with it. So you can't blame the currency. You have to blame the people. And then what this is interesting. So what does Bitcoin do? Well, it creates an immutable record. So if you commit crime, and again, crime is as defined by the government that wants to allow you to get away with it, back it, or if it's not in their interest, define it as something that's not good for society, and everyone has those different ideologies. Then the Bitcoin blockchain creates an immutable record, and so most of the major crimes that have happened in Bitcoin, quote crimes, things like creating a website that allowed people to buy drugs online or stealing bitcoins from an exchange, even if it takes years, they tend to get caught, because once you can connect an identity to an immutable record of that, then you've got an immutable record, which doesn't give you plausible deniability. And that's how they've managed to catch the biggest crimes that were committed with Bitcoin.
Well,
And so you kind of
let me.
have this
I'm
different friction where people are creating privacy coins where they're fully private, but they're still not Bitcoin. And there's been a friction throughout the whole history of Bitcoin around implementing features that allows it to be more private. And this is the cat and mouse and the different types of games. But yeah, money laundering is the whole point of the CBDC,
so
is to allow people to have less freedom with their money.
just one last question, and I'll go back down to be listener. But so let's use a real case scenario the EU just announced, I think it was today or yesterday, that they're going to send a lot of money over to Ukraine. So let's say it changed to the CBDC system. How would you be able to track the money that the EU is sending over to Ukraine to make sure it was being actually used properly for defense and everything else? And
Well,
then
I can
again,
answer
thank you
that,
for the
Aaron.
time.
Just so you know, there's going to be two different kinds. There's going to be the wholesale kind and the retail kind, and one of them is going to be on a private ledger. And I think that, that kind of provides the veil for whatever that money's used for and how it's used, but it'll in some way be accounted in the total. And I would have to bust out my notes to be able to elaborate, and I can do that. But I also wanted to see if Simon had anything to add.
Yeah, so it's a technical feat. So you come up with a problem. How can you ensure that this money is used in this way? And that's something that can be programmatically implemented into the central bank digital currency. And that's why when trying to achieve that goal, you end up with something that becomes ever more oppressive the more rules you program into that money. But the money that will become the one that everyone wants to be used is the one that has the most level of freedom. So if you want to become more oppressive, then you implement more programmatic rules into it, whatever your ideology is. But the one that I think becomes the world reserve currency is the one that allows people the most level of freedom, which also has its problems in that you can't necessarily control it to the same degree that someone would like to. I'll give you an example. So, for example, let's take this conflict that we're experiencing right now. An exchange called Binance, the largest exchange in the world, recently had its co-founder, its founder, CZ. He was asked to step down, fined $150 million, and the company had to pay a $4.3 billion fine. What happened is that allegedly there was records whereby Hamas had an account with Binance. And so America decides that Hamas is a terrorist. And so they take $4.3 billion from Binance. And then that goes up to the Department of Justice. And America decides that it's okay to fund the genocide of Gaza by sending money to Israel. And so they just take one form of what they classify terrorism because it's not in line with the interest and send it to someone that they don't classify a terrorist, where if they were committing the same acts because they weren't ideologically or strategically aligned, they would then, so literally they're taking one form of money from one crime and sending it to another. This type of thing is going to be codified in central bank digital currencies, and they're all going to be ideologically driven, and people are going to try to oppress and control. When we move into a world of less oppression and less control through technology, because we're putting people together that can share ideas. And so this is where the one that tries to control the most becomes the CBDC that probably gets the least adoption, and the one that puts most freedom in it is the one that probably gets the most adoption, with the exit regulated by Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is the regulator. It's oppressed too much here, and people can go into something that has no connection to any ideology, which is apolitical and is just digital trustlessness, that anyone can plug into anywhere in the world.
Thank you for that, Simon. So I will say that I've gone down the rabbit hole on every, like, I guess, alternative that's possible: gold, silver, other coins, XRP, Bitcoin. And it was quite a journey. I mean, some of the Bitcoiners in here, they kind of rode along with me, and they were always, sending me information. And what I did find, and my crowd's a tough crowd because they don't have a lot of trust for anything, especially, even when it's technology, but and so lots of questions, lots of things that even I wouldn't have never thought of. And what I found, just based on my own, this is just my personal journey, is that Bitcoin was the only thing I think was in terms of digital transacting and just the system was completely unexploitable. Outside of any natural disasters that would really send the whole world, spinning, it did seem to be the one that was solid. And I am a person that, of course, there's the questions like, who's this Satoshi guy? Is it a setup? I'm also of the thinking that there's oftentimes divine interventions. I mean, just for there to be like 13 years of this establishing itself before we kind of, snowball into this crazy centralized system. I don't think that that's something outside of a divine intervention. I mean, it very well, and if there was alternative intentions for it, which I don't think so, once you kind of learn more about Satoshi and then, get through the white paper and then just kind of understand how like just, two people, three people, four people, and then it just kind of blew up to what it is now. I mean, it's just quite fascinating. So I think that it would behoove you to definitely better understand what the CBD's system and the unified ledger look like, the risks that decentralization could impose, especially when we've all had in 2020, we got a taste of what that looks like when it comes to compliance and mandates and, having somebody that centralized government at a global level, being able to control the use of your money is a very scary thing. And I think that based on what we went through, everyone should be learning about that and learning about alternatives. That's kind of something we all see the health of the financial system, and it just, it's there's some pending doom. It's going to, I think everybody it's a matter of when, not if. So, and thank you, Simon. I wanted to also tap in with Lily, just to see if she had any comments or anything, and then we can, I'll give it to you for any final thoughts. Go ahead, Lily.
No, thanks for the space. And this has been really interesting for me because I actually haven't heard you speak this much, Simon, which is kind of like, I don't know how that happened, right? With the amount of Bitcoin spaces, et cetera, that I'm in. But I think this is a really good, like everything that you said, there's a really good place to expand on a lot of things, right? There's a lot that goes into this. So, Maze, I'm looking forward to your next spaces on these because there is just so much when you really get into all of this and some of these topics I've been going back and forth with a couple people, and some of these topics really are entire spaces on their own, like a sentence, right? So it's I just appreciate the space, and it was great to listen to you, Simon, and thanks for hosting, Maze.
Lily, what are some of the things that you feel like deserve maybe the top three kind of more expanded space on?
So the top three, I think that it's important to discuss when you're talking about CBDCs. I think you do have to have the talk about Tether, right? And getting an understanding of Tether. And also, they are trialing in Lugano this whole Tether Bitcoin project, right? Plus just how Tether is used around the world. I think that that's a conversation that needs to be had. I think with talking about China and their possibility, I think that it's important to go into the history of the shutdown of BCCI, which is Bank of Credit and Commerce International, and how that went down in 1991. And that's just its own kind of rabbit hole, and what maybe the modern day equivalent of that would be within digital assets and cryptocurrency. And then I'm trying to think because there were a couple other things that popped into my head as everybody was talking, but I'll think on it a little bit, Maze, and if there's some other places you want to go with all of that. Like there's a lot of really interesting things. Also, some of the cycles that people were talking about cycles, and I think sometimes the discussion about cycles is limited because people are introduced to cycles with specific books or specific language, and there's actually quite a lot of very fascinating, like I actually just spent a few hours in a reference library looking at some historical stuff on some cycles that I just started learning about a couple weeks ago, and it's very interesting how it aligns with a lot of more niche things that I look at too, but then it also goes along with some of this other stuff that everybody has the vocabulary for. So But it can give more insight and understanding to know more cycles and have that context as well. So that's, yeah. And I'll try and think some more.
Okay, I wrote those three down though. I wrote tether, BCCI down, hold on. BCCI shutdown, and then what the modern day would look like in cycles. And so, yeah, we'll coordinate. And Simon, if you want to also participate in that, that'd be great. I can loop you in. But I do think that, yeah, I would love to have more expounded, and if you have people you want to invite, Lily, let me know. And guys, I just, I really appreciate you, Simon, for, giving up all of the information that you did, carving out the time to share your wisdom and your journey. And also, if you want to, please, again, plug your book. And if you have any final thoughts, take the mic.
Yeah, thank you so much. Lily, those were very specific topics. May's put you on the spot, and you came up with some really interesting things that, we certainly can discuss in the future. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on all those things. One final story I'd love to leave everyone with is one of the most interesting times for me in my whole Bitcoin journey was going on the ground in El Salvador. And El Salvador is a country that actually stood up to the IMF and stood up to the Bank of England and kind of took what were my life struggles and actually said F you to the Bank of England, who was very concerned about El Salvador people, allegedly. And President Bukele was one of those, brave presidents that decided to break the system. El Salvador has been suffering in unimaginable civil wars for a long time, and there was he gets criticisms. I'm not here to back any government. When anyone becomes someone that we need to call out against, I don't care about ideological alignment. I'll always call it out. But it was fascinating to see taking out some of the criminal mafia run organizations that were happening in that country, and suddenly all of the little local businesses, they had to give 30% of all their income to the mafia. And when that was changed, we had this oppressed nation of people that suddenly were used to giving 30% of their income to the mafia, even though they came from extreme poverty. But because they were always risking their lives, and they knew that their family was going to be killed and murdered if they didn't give money to the mafia, they built a culture of savings where you always found a way to pay that 30% cut. And when I was on the ground in El Salvador, speaking to these little micro businesses and helping them understand that actually that 30% that you used to pay to the gangsters, you could put that in Bitcoin, and it's actually legal tender in your country. And getting people used to this concept of spending less than you earn, investing the difference. And I said, if anyone's willing to allow me to pay in Bitcoin, then I'll sit through with you and kind of put together a little bit of plan about how you could take that money and you could build a little Bitcoin plan around that. And I think what's going to become really interesting is when sovereigns decide, that they want independence from central bank digital currencies as well. This is a dollarized world. This is a dollarized economy where they essentially they have to give up to the policy of the Federal Reserve because dollar is a national currency. And then Bitcoin became this thing, and everyone mocked it when El Salvador government was buying it, putting it on their balance sheet, and the price kept crashing over the 4-year cycle. And then suddenly they looked like the smartest people in the room. And suddenly we had in previous countries, for example, Bulgaria confiscated a couple of 100,000 Bitcoin. That Bitcoin is worth more than the entire national debt of the country because it went through corruption. But when sovereigns start to realize that they can actually counter in the same way that I got out of my debt cycle from the fiat currency proof of weapons network, by using proof of work and going through that cycle, it eats away at those fiat currency debts. That's the same for countries. That's the same for companies. That's the same for, and we're going to enter this really interesting flippening cycle. And one of the pet projects that I would love to see happen, God willing, is that imagine in the country that, in Israel, for example, built upon, the fiat currency in the background and connections with creating some of the laws behind central banks. And then in Palestine, you could have it rebuilt upon building such a culture, installing such a culture, with hard money, with halal money next to haram money, the proof of weapons network versus the proof of work network. Whether that happens in that type of thing, I think that in this flippening cycle that we have ahead, as long as we can all come together and we can put ideas together, I think there's really interesting opportunities for countries to also just reverse the oppression that maybe some of the things that they were victims of from other proof of weapons networks. And I can't wait to see some of these things come through now that we're all able to share our ideas, discuss our ideas, and share this just diverse culture of experiences that we're all able to bring together. And I just hope we can keep that freedom of speech going and these networks don't get too censored. But at the end of the day, there isn't a company in Bitcoin. There isn't a ruler in Bitcoin. There isn't a central bank in Bitcoin. And freedom to transact is freedom of speech, because financial transactions is the way that most of the oppression happens in the world. And so it's a gift. And I think if you were alive at the time when Bitcoin was created, I think it's worth experiencing what freedom really feels like. And that's what I'd encourage you all to try it. You might like it. Thanks for having me, Mace.
Oh my God. That was so
Simon,
epic.
are,
And, oh,
are you saying the central bank is akin to the mafia?
I think so. I think
I'm
you know
just
the
joking.
answer to that.
I also think we have to add to the list, if Maze allows it, doing or she wants to, right? Israel, Palestine, that area is very interesting for tech innovation and what the market there already was putting into place for like cyber, like to pull forward cryptocurrency, etc. There's like a really old Bitcoin only exchange there that did some interesting things towards the beginning of this very unfortunate conflict, right? And there's like some interesting technology that some companies in Silicon Valley, they had their teams in like Tel Aviv working on. So I think that's another cool little rabbit hole, maybe. So.
Oh, 100%. The AI technology that's gone between the tragedies that are being committed in Gaza and how AI technology is choosing those locations in their epic failure of hitting, the targets that they're alleging that they're going for and leading to this genocide. And the Israeli military industrial complex and the technology, they actually were exporting their oppression technology through the technology that allowed the occupation to occur. That is actually a really interesting subject, because that is a whole nother rabbit hole, and some of the different agendas that have been funded through that technology.
And then also things like smartphones, right? Like the cell phone, etc.
Pegasus and all
So,
that stuff.
yeah, Pegasus, that's another one that a lot of people don't talk about, which I think is also, there's a big question there, right, with NSO and Pegasus. But I just think it's a very, because of necessity, the kind of technological innovation and adoption, like it's a fascinating topic. So, you know.
Great, Mace. Could I leave with one word? Because sometimes I'm misunderstood when I say things like Israel and America and Britain. I'm referring to the governments, not the people. I believe that governments are this like thing that gets in the way of our humankind and relationship with God, and so I'm by no means referring to the American people or the British people or the Israeli people. We're a bunch of mixed bags, but I think that when I'm referring to some of the actions of the nation state. I'm referring to the acts that the governments are taking. And often people think when I'm talking about China that they think, oh, you're supporting China. No, I'm just saying governments will be governments. There'll always be they'll always be doing bad things. We should always be speaking against the bad things that they do. And I don't really, it's not that I'm trying, if me supporting something is that I want that to happen. I probably think China's going to do a worse job than that, but I'm just a realist. And the reason I can be a realist is because I live in the world of Bitcoin, which has no connection, and I live in the world of a relationship with God, which has no connection to the country. And sometimes we have to, live within the boundaries of these kind of artificial barriers that will run. But this is no reflection of the people, and I just want to make sure people understand that, because changing empires, people get defensive, and all these things. It's not a reflection of what I want to happen. It's just a reflection of what I think will happen that we need to adjust to.
Absolutely. It is important to drop disclaimers nowadays. Trust me, I get it. So yes, I will tee that up. I'll DM you guys in the background in the back channel to tee it up. And actually, that was a great one. I would love, especially the one about Israel. I know about the partnership with cyber crimes and the and what the global strategy that is being developed for all of the nation states to kind of create a national strategy to roll up to, and how digital currencies plays into that. I think will definitely be a great space to have. So thank you, Lily, for those, and thank you, Simon. I really appreciate you, and thank you to all the listeners, all the speakers. Thanks for coming, and as soon as we get this coordinated, I will definitely share the event so that you guys can RSVP. And without further ado, I wish you guys a wonderful night. And again, Simon, thank you so much.
Thank you, Maze.
Thank you.